I say we get started. Pretty straightforward agenda tonight. It's a work session, so we don't have all of our updates and stuff, but we've got a public works and utilities budget discussion. Here's scope of work budget discussions. Let you guys dive right in. I think of all of our areas in the budget, it's interesting to read through. It's interesting to read through the utilities one because I think it's the least subject to our sense of priorities and the most we just trust your guidance as experts in this. We're not going to tell you when you need a new screw press or whatever the other items are. So as opposed to the other budgets, where it's well, we think we should prioritize this or that. So I think it'll be an interesting discussion and hear from you on what you need to keep the water running for the most part. It sounds like what's in the budget tonight. So I'll hand it over to Kevin and Scott.
Excellent. For my part of this, I'll do it like I typically do and assume you guys can read. If you got questions about tires, trees, trail paving, or street lights, I'm here. And if you got questions about water and sewer, Scott's here.
And ditches.
And ditches. Yes. So I mean, is there anything in particular you'd like us to hit on that you saw in the memo?
I mean, I think maybe a couple of the big ticket items I think are helpful. And anything that's a sort of a strategic move where it's we have to decide whether to do this or not, or whether to do it now and how to prioritize it. Just maybe give us a little bit of the thinking behind some of the bigger ticket items I think would be helpful.
Well, I think most of those will probably be in the water and wastewater budget.
Could I add one thing?
Yeah.
So in the budget draft that was shared, there was a memo and it mentioned some bigger ticket items in 4 years. So if you could also talk a little bit about how we're setting ourselves up for that, that'd be really helpful too.
Yeah, I can definitely talk to that. You have anything you want to touch on first?
No, go right ahead.
Okay. So we'll zoom out a little bit away from this memo. Big picture, we got a couple things coming, a couple bigger things to think about. So there are supposed to be some new regulations coming down from the EPA for nitrogen and phosphorus loading out of the wastewater plant. What that means is we don't know where those numbers are going to come down at yet. We'll eventually need a fairly large upgrade for the wastewater plant to meet those needs. So everything we're doing for the wastewater plant right now is trimming around the edges. Where can we save energy? Where can we improve our operations? Where can we reduce labor and keep running smooth at a low cost for the next 5 to 10 years? In that 5 to 10 year range, we are likely looking at, I don't want to provide numbers because who knows where it's going to end up at the time, but in the millions, multiple millions of an upgrade. So that's where the wastewater plant's at.
And maybe pause there for just a second. And we're assuming that when those regulations come down, funding won't come down with them and that we'll be told you have to come into compliance. I mean, I know it's impossible to predict all that, but is that kind of what we're preparing for?
We should be prepared that there would be limited funding, but I would expect to see some funding.
Okay.
And we'll just see where it comes and how it comes. A big driver of this is just going to be at what limit does the EPA set those numbers? So is it relatively a little lower than we are now? That's not so hard. Is it way lower than it is now? Now we're working at the limits of our current technology for treatment. So that's kind of where we're at.
Okay.
And from a financial perspective, the thing I would say on that is always keep in mind that we hold no debt in the water fund or the wastewater fund. So if we need to borrow money, I think that we're in a pretty good position to do that. And it's not going to be piling on top of other, unanticipated or unplanned for expenses.
Also important to think about too with the wastewater system and wastewater plant is that plant was originally installed in, I believe, 1973. So we're at 50 years old. It's been upgraded 5 or 6 times since then. It's meeting our needs, but it doesn't have capacity to expand. And as we roll into this regulatory trigger, we'll have a lot more discussions. You'll get a lot more information from me is essentially where that's going.
Any other questions on that particular topic? We'll keep going.
I guess, do you have like an idea of what our population limit is under our current wastewater regime or?
Population limit. So what ends up happening, this is all regulated by CDPHE, Colorado Department of Health and Environment. And if we start exceeding our hydraulic capacity, so it's, I should say, exceeding 80% of our hydraulic permitted capacity, we have to start designing
That is for water or wastewater?
for wastewater.
Okay.
Mhm. So there's a permit trigger that says, hey, pay attention to this and start working on it.
Mhm.
So, and then you have years to make it happen.
Mhm.
We are close to that permit trigger,
Mhm.
but we are not seeing increasing volumes. We're not seeing increased use.
Mhm.
So I have a feeling that probably comes from the low residency we have. People that aren't here full time
Mhm.
is why we're not seeing an increase. We're seeing it flat.
Do you have any idea what that number might be if we had a full house?
The hydraulic capacity, it's
Like, do you think we'd be way over it if suddenly all of our second homeowners lived here or?
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, if there was something that had everybody living here, all houses full, yeah, we'd probably be in a plant design.
Mhm. Okay.
Okay, that's interesting to know. Yeah,
Mhm.
thanks for that question,
Yeah,
Chris.
so market dynamics, I think, could change things.
Good to know.
Okay, water. Big picture, zooming out on water, or any other questions?
I just had a quick question. Did you see an increase during COVID when I know that there was a lot of second homeowners that came here and stayed here for a while just to get out of the cities? Did you see an increase then?
Yeah, we had a couple summers, 2021 and 2022 summers, we saw higher peaks. And they came right up to that 80% trigger, but did not exceed really. But to trigger that, you'd have to be above that 80% permit trigger on a regular basis. So it wasn't like close, we're not that close. But we could not expand to being a 10 or 12,000 population town and not have a new plant.
That's good to know. I don't feel like we've ever had this discussion before in my time sitting here of like that. I've never heard that trigger before. You've probably mentioned it. Maybe it went right in one ear and out the other or something, but I didn't realize that we were that close.
Well, what you heard from me in the past, which has changed, and that's why this guy right here is a great person to have. This is his field of expertise and it's not mine. Were the talk about the two triggers, the kind of the concentration trigger and the flow trigger. My understanding in the past is we were probably going to get to that concentration trigger before we got to the flow trigger. And I think what Scott's noticing and seeing is they're both important.
Mhm. Yeah, I didn't bring up the concentration trigger as much, there are two triggers, they're related, and they're both flat.
Okay.
Okay.
And the part of the problem with some of the waste or water saving efficiency measures at this point was we were conceivably affecting that concentration trigger, right? If we went way too aggressive into water conservation.
Well, I don't think we were saying that. I think what we were seeing was in the past, maybe not as much as we are now, that concentration was creeping up quicker than the flow was.
Mhm.
Mhm.
And that there's nothing, don't
And
get me
that
wrong,
would,
there's
that
nothing
would
wrong with
suggest more
water
efficiency to some
conservation.
degree, right?
Say-
That would suggest more efficiency to some degree, like more efficient toilets and showers and such,
Yeah,
because okay.
Mhm.
Okay, so
Sorry.
let's keep going and we might come back around to it,
Good
but
info. Okay, we'll switch over to the water side. Much cleaner.
Literally.
So zooming out from the water side, We currently have great water treatment plants. We have really high quality water. I think everybody should understand that. And we have resiliency because we have technically 4 water treatment plants, 3 that serve the whole community, 1 that serves just the RV park. That's what we take care of. Which we need to get you all out to see it all. I'd love to be able to give you a tour. So what happens is any one of those plants goes down, the other plants can meet our demand, which is great. However, we are not currently set up to meet our maximum summer demand if there was a long-term disaster. And that's what we need to work towards. So that's where we are creating the long-range plan to improve our resiliency to manage a fire or flood, really. Those are the 2 main things that I'm thinking about. So if the Roaring Fork floods and we lose the Roaring Fork plant or the well house, I want to make sure the other 2 plants can meet our maximum demand no matter what happens, essentially, to be able to keep the wheels on the tracks for a year or 2 while we rebuild. So that's where most of these projects are setting that up. We're trying to get everything running in a way that we can start tackling these capital projects so we can manage disaster resiliency.
And so you have a well installation, a Roaring Fork well installation in here. Do you have any idea of what that's for engineering and planning costs? Do you know what the total construction cost of that would be in the following year, or?
For just the well?
Yeah.
So it's related. So let me speak about it in a big picture because it's all related and how we're gonna get there essentially. Glad I brought this extra sheet. Good job. All right, so the way we're thinking about the Roaring Fork well, so Roaring Fork well is the one over here by the nature park, right? So we want to start working towards getting our access and installing a new well or 2. That's part of this project for 2025. Once that well is installed, now we can increase our capacity there. Then we'll step over to the Roaring Fork treatment plant and we will install a 1/3 of an identical treatment train in that plant. So we are wrapping up a project right now to simplify our treatment operations in that plant, which will decrease our labor and decrease some of our energy use over there and simplify that whole plant so we can just keep expanding as needed with identical simple treatment trains. That's the goal.
And that building has space for it?
Yeah, with this new, shouldn't call them new, they're not brand new. They're cartridge filters. This is like what you would see in your Brita filter. It's just giant sized. So that's so we're trying to get to that simplification so we can then install the wells. And then once the wells are installed, we can just keep adding trains.
Okay. Great.
So that's one component.
Overall cost of the well.
Oh, overall cost. Sorry, I got sidetracked.
That's okay.
Overall cost. So we're looking at, I believe, full build out with the well and everything else we need is around 700,000 over 3 years.
Okay.
Hopefully to be complete by 2027, end of 2027.
Have we ever seen, I mean, I've been in the valley my whole life and I don't remember any floods or fires that have taken out the treatment plants. Has that happened in recent modern history in the town of Carbondale? I'm just thinking, like, you think about the 1 in 100 or 1 in 1,000 and like, have we had one?
I don't know.
Are we due for one?
One that has affected either the Crystal Well or Roaring Fork wells?
Not substantially, but usually like at the Crystal Well, that's from a mudslide up and going up to Redstone. And we're usually proactive, kind of like we were this year when we heard about the discharge from Aspen and that mine coming down. We just shut the Roaring Fork plant off, ran on the Crystal. We've done that in the past where we shut the Crystal Well off and just run off the Roaring Fork if we know something's coming down. From a fire aspect, I'm not I'm not aware of anything happening here, but we have done fire mitigation projects since I've been here around our Nettle Creek treatment plant, which is in the middle of the forest.
Definitely.
It's, there's nothing around it but trees. So that's probably the one that's at the highest risk of a wildfire episode. But the other thing that could affect us here is not necessarily a fire here, but if we would have had major flooding after like the Lake Christine fire and got a bunch of ash in the river, our wells are not surface. We don't suck it out of the river, but we suck it out pretty darn close to the river.
Yeah, and that's, I don't know exactly what that risk looks like, but our wells are 8 to 10 feet above the river and within 50 feet of the river. They're susceptible. So I don't think we've done a risk analysis on it. And I don't know that I've seen an actual flood damage a well, or haven't heard of that anyway in the history, but I think it's potential. I think there's potential. And then to Kevin's point, the fire at Nettle is probably our greatest risk probability that we're mitigating, which is why we're kind of starting here with the Roaring Fork well.
Yeah, and I remember back a few years ago when we did that vulnerabilities, climate action, thing, the VCAPs, and identified water supply as one of our main vulnerabilities with climate change. But we also said, like, let's balance our approach. Let's go toward building additional supply capacity and redundancy, which you're talking about, and let's also reduce our demand through efficiency and the turf buyback and all that kind of stuff. So it feels like we're still on that, like, all of the above approach. I mean, I wonder sometimes, is there a point at which we could spend too much on water redundancy and stuff for a, doomsday scenario, when we could have spent less and just reduced our demand? I wonder about that sometimes. It doesn't feel like that's the direction that we're headed now.
We're not planning for a doomsday scenario. We're planning on, let's keep the water flowing. If there is a major problem, we saw it in 2018. This community responds well if we just tell them, hey, look, we're having an issue. Would you please not use so much water right now? They'll respond to that. But, that's in the scenario. We've probably gotten closer than you guys that have known me have known to being like having issues. If we've had issues at both the Crystal Well and the Roaring Fork Well at the same time during the summer, and that is stressful. Because we need to keep water in that tank for fires, not just for people to drink and water their lawn with. We need to be able to provide water for fire suppression.
And that's the one above the high school, kind of? Is that where it is?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, my thought process to add what Kevin was just speaking about, thought process isn't to expand and have a massively increased capacity. It's two things, two steps. If any one plant is down for an extended period of time due to, I'll call it a disaster, but I don't want to be over dramatic. Even a minor flood. Oh, we got to get out and drill new wells. That's going to take 3 or 4 months to get permitting done and get a driller out there. That's not unreasonable. If we're down 3 or 4 months through a summer, 2 plants can handle it as is. Pumps break. So what happens when that Crystal Well goes down and this other one's down? Now we're on 1 plant for a week. I want to be able to manage that scenario.
Okay.
That's the target.
Okay. That sounds totally reasonable. Yeah. Thank you for planning so far ahead. I mean, I feel like this is one of Carbondale's greatest strengths is we have the water rights on paper and we have the ability to actually access those, and we're very resilient. So thank you for continuing to make us even more resilient. What else you got for us?
Okay, so other big picture, just to kind of wrap that thought process up.
Yep.
Roaring Fork Well is kind of we'll kind of start engineering and that planning to expand that capacity. At the same time, we're going to pivot back to the Nettle Creek pump back system that you might have heard Mark talking about. But we have, I think, a slightly better strategy and idea to try to push on that. We need that pump back system, not just to create renewable energy. It's a side benefit. I think that's a really positive side benefit. But by putting that pump back system, we can keep the 50 houses that are on the Nettle main line that go all the way south to Mount Sopris. We can keep those operational while we upgrade the Nettle Creek plant, which is kind of the next step in that capacity and that expansion. So it's the reason why we have to do that step to then get to the next step. So now we're talking 5 to 10 years out. So pump back system, that'll take probably 5 years to accomplish. Then we'll start working on Nettle Creek expansion. There is one other thing that I should mention that maybe has not ever really been discussed. In 2021, CDPHE reevaluated the way that they calculate disinfection time. So we currently have to use more chlorine to meet our requirements to get the disinfection we need, because they said that our tanks that we use at each plant to disinfect are too small. So that's, again, is part of all of this planning and that long range planning. We're going to step through it as we get to a plant and we start expanding, do a bigger tank, redo that contact time, and it'll decrease our labor and decrease our chlorine, and everyone will like the water a little bit better. So it's all kind of fitting together. Roaring Fork's the same way, Nettle's the same way, Crystal Well's the same way. As we step through these expansion projects, we will also need to expand those tanks because of a derating from CDPHE in 2021.
Okay.
So there's another thing there I wanted to mention. There's a lot of moving pieces here. I'm trying not to bore you all.
No, this is really, really fascinating, and I think we really appreciate the thoughtfulness. We're very fortunate. We have 2 rivers coming into town, and we have some built-in redundancy. But you taking it the next step, I think we all really appreciate that. I mean, we've seen what's happened in the southeast where they don't have water, they don't have sewer. It's just been devastating. So if we have the option to keep that going, we can keep people safe in case of something happening. So really appreciate it.
And while we're talking Nettle Creek and pump back and all that, where are we with the micro hydro? I remember multiple times where I thought we were totally done with that, but it's still not quite operational.
It's okay.
You had to ask that.
You just picked that baton right up from Mark and kept
We
going.
are, I would call it 85 to 90% complete. And we have pivoted away from a vendor that we had contracted with at the beginning of this project. Actually, the contract was signed in 2021, to give you an idea how far back this is going. That vendor has been incapable of delivering their products. And we have a new vendor that is in design to take over the rest. What we're missing is a control panel. We need the whole brain to make the thing work. All the physical pieces are in.
Okay.
We just need the electric, the electrical controls and the literally be able to plug it into Holy Cross and they say go. So that's the last piece.
Yeah. Okay. And what's the optimistic or pessimistic timeline on that?
We are expecting to see the control panel by the end of the year.
Okay.
And then start up we'll probably need to wait till some snow melt to get final startup.
Okay.
So April, May.
Okay.
Fingers crossed.
This is in no way anything to do with Scott. This has been a real, you did a nice job of sugarcoating that. Because it's been a source of frustration since he started here, and someday outside of here, we can get into more details.
I didn't use names. Everybody's protected. Yeah, I think we are on track. The big picture, we're on track for startup in the spring, and we'll be very excited to see it done.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think that wraps up the big picture on the water side. The only thing I wanted to mention on the ditch side of things is we had quite a few problems the last couple of years with just typical overflows. We're just seeing a lot of culverts are rusting out, things getting clogged up that can't just be cleaned out, and we got to go do a little bit of digging. You might have seen all the work that actually the streets crew did an amazing job this last spring, realigning the Weaver right by Crystal Bridge. We pushed that up against the toe of the wall and protected it from the river and by filling that in and trying to keep that embankment wide. So we're gonna do things like that this next year, with one added project that we're gonna start out as just an engineering exercise, I believe, in 2025. I did forget to write that into our memo here. This is gonna be to replace the Carbondale headgate to look just like the Weaver headgate. So if you've seen the Weaver, we love the Weaver. It's safe, it's easy to operate, we can adjust flows great. So we wanna do the same at the Carbondale. And we're gonna add some version of a grade stabilization, which is another component that we did with the Crystal River project. So we don't have to get in the river with big dozers and push rocks around. Same concept. I think we can probably find grant match with that. So we're gonna just get the ball rolling in 2025, hopefully in execution 2026.
Great. Well, that's good to hear that we learned some lessons there that we can apply elsewhere, because that was kind of talked about, the Crystal River project as like a pilot project for, I think Picken County Healthy Rivers looked at it that way and had a number of other sites where they wanted to try similar things. So they'd
Yeah.
probably be a good partner on that.
Yeah, we're really just expanding upon that. It worked great. So,
Great.
and we found out Carbondale Headgate has a safety risk too. We ended up with a workers' comp claim on that one from me.
Oh, okay. All right.
So we want to improve safety.
Yep. Yeah.
Just wanted to ask a quick question about the sewer main replacement on Second.
Yes.
Great, and I know the timing is probably not ideal. And we don't know that we have the grant, but the whole notion of a geothermal
Mhm.
line in there, if you just keep it in the back of your mind, it's probably more hassle than it's worth. But if we get the grant in January, it'd be great to keep our minds open about how we could take advantage of the street being ripped up to put something then that could potentially benefit those folks over there.
We've been in contact with CLEER
Great,
and
great.
we're prepared to put in that line in advance.
Fantastic.
And
Thank
it's already
you.
in design.
Thank you so much.
Wow, that's great.
That's really, really impressive. Thank you.
Yeah, I think there's a huge amount of potential there to just, it all obviously hinges on whether we get the kernel of the thing started, but I think it is a good thing to sort of keep in your head of like, yeah, that would be a way for us to maybe cost effectively expand the system in the future if we sort of line it up with what we're doing with sewers and other digging projects, essentially like, hey, let's throw a conduit in there and you can extend it down to a new neighborhood or whatever, and people
Well,
can pay to plug in.
And we don't have to get stuck that the system starts at Third Street, right?
Right.
That might not be the best place to start it, and it could be somewhere else. But having pipe throughout town just makes it so much easier to start making all those connections.
Yeah, and I should also explain a little bit too. Our sewer system overall is in great shape. So we just did a big assessment this year that we're going to keep on going every year. We did that acoustic assessment. I think we discussed a little bit with you guys about that. So we did this whole assessment. Overall, it's in good shape. However, all of Old Town and then Second Street, Crystal Circle, Maroon Drive, that zone, that was installed with a pipe called truss pipe in the 70s. So it's kind of bridging the gap between old clay pipe in the 50s to PVC, which is more modern. So it's kind of like right in the middle for about 7 years. And that stuff is, some of it was lined and is doing okay. Second Street was not lined, is not doing okay. So that's where we're getting on that one now. But you should expect to see these kind of segments being replaced every year or two. We're gonna tackle another 3-4 blocks. That stuff is all aging out. We are at 75, 80 years on a lot of that sewer line.
Wow.
So, unfortunate for our budget. Because digging up sewer line is expensive.
I'm sure.
But could be some opportunities.
Yes, and we have expressed that to CLEER, that we do have a long-range replacement program that we are still designing. But they know that there are opportunities to continue to piggyback on that.
Great. Really appreciate it.
great.
Thank you.
And these are all, I think, good reminders for us why we charge high tap fees and why you ask for rate increases and, why we have a healthy reserve fund, because each of these projects is so expensive. So we're in good shape to tackle them.
Great.
Okay, anything else from the water wastewater side of things?
Nothing from me. Any questions?
Yeah, any questions from the board?
Great work. Thank you.
It's been a great
Great update.
overview of kind of where we are.
I might go back to Kevin's side of things for a sec, for
Yeah,
a
let's
couple
do
of very minor nitpicks. Well, I don't know, maybe they're not minor, but I guess the first thing would be I saw there's a lot of LED streetlight replacement in the budget. And I'm just a little bit dismayed with how blindingly bright the ones we have are now. And I guess I just wonder if we could specify something that's dimmer or yellower, or I just don't think it's that safe even to just get like a headlight in the face in the middle of the night when you're going around. So I guess I guess if there's any sort of leeway there, I don't know if we have like a real set, program. It seems like we've got all kinds of different streetlights, but I'm sure we would like to standardize them in the long run. But I guess I still feel like the streetlights have gotten, with LED technology, they've become brighter and more jarring. So that's one nitpick.
So the project I called out in here, the reason we have so many different kinds is because some of them are ours, some of them are XLs, some of them are Holy Crosses. This
Okay.
happens to be in XL territory. And we did half of that area a couple of years ago. And there were some pretty good lessons learned. One of the risks of XL providing them is they go, this is what we do. What do you want to,
Mhm.
They actually modified some of their ordering because of what we experienced out there. So I think this will be a more successful
Great,
rollout
great,
than the initial phase of that was.
great.
Can you explain a little bit about how, to what extent the lights are ours versus the electric companies? I've within the neighborhood, it is an issue, and it's created as much hazard, I think, as it has lessened when you take a turn, you're going from blinding light into darkness completely, and unless there's something coming with the headlight, I mean, if there's a pedestrian or a bicyclist without a light on, they're completely invisible. Whereas I think the previous lights had a little bit of a fade to a gradient to them, whereas these you're either in the light or you're very much not. But so to what extent do we make any decisions on what goes in those lights, or are we just at the mercy of electric companies?
I'm trying to think through this because it's so, for example, over in your neighborhood with the Cobra lights on the poles.
Yes.
Those were replaced, I think, the first year I got here.
Mhm.
And that was just XL going from the old,
Sodium vapor or whatever.
yeah, whatever those older style were to the new style LEDs. They had, I think, one brand or one model for the highway and one model for in town.
Interesting.
And it was like, we're doing this. what I would say, the control we have is where they are. You know, Excel doesn't come out and just put up streetlights where they want streetlights. They come out and put up streetlights where we tell them we want streetlights.
Interesting.
So, you know, like the ones over in the Hendrick Ranch neighborhood that we're working on this year, those were all part of the original development of that and required by the town to be put in. It's not up to the utility of, oh, I'm gonna go throw up a street light out there.
Okay.
Does that?
Yeah,
kinda
no,
answer your
that's
question?
good info. Yeah, thank you.
But then it sounds like we're working with Excel better now than we were 7 years ago.
I think 7 years ago, honestly, they looked at us like, oh, there's Carbondale again, you know, dark sky Carbondale doesn't want anybody to see anything. And I think they realized that we're not the only community that feels like that. And they've received pressure from other communities as well to provide other alternatives to either blinding bright white, blue light or darkness.
To Ross's question about like some are hours and some are Excels, right? Like,
Mhm.
so the ones like on Main Street and I think up Highway 133, the more historic, the black lamppost looking ones, those are all hours, right?
Correct.
Excel doesn't touch those. So then we're
Oh,
in
really?
total
Interesting. Okay.
control. Yeah.
If you see any of them that are on the black poles with the kind of lantern
Mhm.
style, those are all owned by the town.
Okay.
Yeah, all along the west side of 133. But right after I got here, we did from Village Road down to Cowan on the other side after, I believe there was an assault right around that time. So any of the black decorative ones are ours, anything that, basically anything north of the Rio Grande Trail that's not one of those would be a Holy Cross light.
Right.
And anything the other way that's not one of those is an XL light.
But we're buying the power for all of them anyway.
Correct.
Yeah.
So we save when it's LED, probably quite a bit.
Yeah, probably.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the
Yeah.
technology is a lot better now. At least they're shining light down for the most part. They're so
yeah.
bright, it's like, the contrast is so much that your eyes can't adjust when you leave the light. And,
Yeah, I just think the
Just
technology,
tone-
he's right,
tone
yeah.
just a little bit. They're too expensive, but at Third Street, we have motion sensing ones, so they're on all the time, but they lower. And then when someone comes by.
I feel like
they're
you did that
cool.
on 8th Street though. That one's nice, the way that one sort of dims a little bit and then it just
Yeah.
brightens when you go by it. in motion.
Yeah, and the ones we have on 8th Street are pure solar. There is no electricity to them.
Geez, even better.
And
No, that's cool.
we have a couple of remote controls that
Great.
they're a lot more user friendly.
Great.
Anything else from?
My only other thing, or unless somebody else wants to go. Sorry. This is sort of the continuation of, we had a conversation with the rodeo people about snow, you know, storage out there at the rodeo lot. And I know you guys were gonna monitor, take a couple of water tests or something more a year, maybe to monitor that. But I still am sort of feel like it seems like a waste of trucking to truck all of our snow a mile down the road. I feel like we could designate the swale and like 3 parking spots over here for snow, and every trip a truck takes is, you know, 1/10 of the distance. And so both the speed at which we can clear snow and stockpile it and the amount of money we have to spend on fuel and labor transporting it out to the rodeo. I guess I'd just be curious what the rest of the council thinks about that. I know it's kind of eyesore a little bit, but I feel like that end of the parking lot, there's a grass swale there. It's not like there's a huge amount of parking going on there in the winter. And I think you could get away with it, especially considering how few times we actually have like really big snowstorms. So I don't know.
Are you talking about the parking lot right here?
Right here, yeah.
I mean, maybe just give it, it's not in the budget, but just perspective on like, how do we choose where we store snow and are we monitoring the impacts there? And have we considered other locations?
Well, this kind of goes back, just a brief history of where we've stored snow in town since I've been here. When I first got here, we were using the city market, the new city market open space there. And then that development started, and so we moved out next to the fire department, in between the fire department and the main entrance off of Meadowwood to the high school. And then that developed.
Where that training building is now?
And what's that?
Where the training building is now?
Yeah, where the
Okay.
training building is. And then, you know, we were looking, I appreciate where you're coming from, but I think there's more snow than you think there probably is.
Okay,
And I don't think we could contain it all here.
okay.
And so it was like, okay, where's the next closest place
Mhm,
to town that we could go?
mhm.
And, you know, but it's a trade-off. We've picked up snow in this town, in the downtown and older parts of town forever. In RVR, we plow it to the sides.
Mhm.
You know, I think the trade-off is we could plow it to the side. You'd have a lot of people unhappy in the downtown area, but
Mhm.
that's the trade-off, is going from pushing it out of the way to stockpiling it in the middle and then having to pick it up.
Mhm.
And as far as that concern, I think somebody that lived down there during the rodeo discussions, as Chris mentioned, asked like, you know, do we know that that's not causing problems for the groundwater down there? Because it is a concentration of all the oil and residue and everything, salt and all that from the streets. Are we doing any kind of monitoring of that, or?
We have taken samples of the water out there, and we'll continue to do that. I mean, keeping in mind that there's also a county road that they take care of and plow right off the edge of the road that feeds right into that.
Mhm.
You know, there's also dust control that we do at the rodeo grounds every year. I would say the amount of potential contamination to the groundwater out there from us storing snow is probably the least of those three. And I think just continuing to monitor the groundwater, you know, if we see something, obviously we'll have a discussion about it. But it's just, and I'm not trying to push back hard. I'm open to other ideas.
Hmm.
It's just, where do you go?
Mhm. Yeah, I guess I just appreciate if you keep your eye on that. And I just think in the long run, if we could find the closest spot, you know, because I don't know how much, yeah, it probably is a lot of snow. And yeah, maybe it doesn't fit back there, but if you just imagine each one of those trucks having to go 10 times as far, that adds up probably cumulatively, and we could save probably money and do it faster.
I think from a labor perspective, that's
So
not inconsequential.
anyway,
Okay, any other questions from the budget?
I just had a question about, you mentioned some trail improvements. Any idea where? Like, I'm sure you know, and I don't. That's why I'm asking the question.
Actually, no, because when we're getting ready to do this, we typically wait until the spring to see how they've gone over the winter, and I get with the parks crew because they're the ones that are out there maintaining those things all winter.
Okay.
And they have a really good idea of sections.
So you actually haven't picked them yet?
I have thoughts of where they might
Oh,
be,
okay,
but I
great.
really want the input of the parks crew and to see what it looks like after the
Okay.
snow's off of it.
Okay. Well, I've got a couple places if you need any extras.
Roll them out.
well, put them in the map too.
So right west of Third Street, between Third Street and 133,
Mhm.
there's some amber maples, and they're pushing up the trail. And then
Along 133.
along
Yeah,
133,
I've
and
seen it,
then I don't know if we take care of this, but the whole trail behind CRES,
Mhm.
it's just got all the Siberian elms are starting to come up, and yeah. So
Okay.
it's probably on the list, but just wanted to make sure.
No, those are,
Great.
I appreciate that.
Thanks.
I tell everybody when they call and ask, hey, did you know this was, I appreciate it when people do that. There's not a lot of us to run around town. So,
And then we'll see the rest of the like pedestrian trail improvements, all that's part of the capital improvement plan, right? Like that's another meeting is my point. This one's
Probably these
just,
little
we're gonna have
segments
another
don't
meeting?
rise to the level.
Yes,
Okay.
you're talking about like some of the MAP Carbondale projects and those sorts of things.
Yeah,
This is probably smaller potatoes on that. This is just,
yeah, this is
Maintenance.
just resurfacing and
Yeah, this
repair.
is kind of maintenance type stuff versus new construction. But yes, we'll do that in the capital.
Great. Any concerns in this department budget as presented?
not that haven't already mentioned.
Okay. All right, well, thank you both for your presentation and
Thanks so much.
Yeah, thank
thinking
you.
ahead.
You got a good one here.
Okay, thanks, Scott. And I think we do want to do that tour. I know that we've talked
Yeah,
about that. But if we're gonna make it happen before it is winter, we have limited time. So.
Yeah, I look forward to it and welcome it. I think you all would learn and have a better
Yeah.
idea of what it takes.
Instead of us going,
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
You're correct.
Yeah, the Nettle Creek was fascinating.
and we can accommodate anybody's schedule normally. So if you guys decide to do that, just let us know.
Okay,
Got 3 dates in my notes
Yeah.
right now. Run by you.
okay, yeah, we need to get those going.
Excellent.
Thank you.
Okay, next up is CLEER, proposed work plan to advance Carbondale climate goals in 2025. Hi, Lauren.
Wasn't planning on it. That's fine, I just wanted to make sure you had permission to if you needed to.
Thank you. Yeah, that we can have the scope of work open. Good evening.
Hi.
Thank you for having me. My name's Lauren Sorbier with CLEER. Thanks for putting us on the agenda tonight. Excited to talk to you all about next year's scope and get feedback, work through questions, all those things. Keep it quick.
Great.
So I right now just have the packet material that I've submitted to you open, and I thought that we could, I don't want to be rereading what I have submitted. So I'm happy to take questions one by one. We could also just have a brief overview really quickly, run through each thing.
I
What
think a
would you
brief-
prefer?
Yeah, I think a brief overview would be good. And I think just as a reminder, we contract with CLEER really to advance our sustainability and climate goals. Like rather than having one person in-house who might have limited expertise, we contract with CLEER. We get this full team with lots of different people. And then we kind of take this cafeteria approach and say, we want you to do these things. And so it's up to us. And Lauren, what was in our budget this year, 2024 for this contract? About 80,000. So this is an increase. It's increased every year, but that's because we ask for more every year.
Mhm.
So it's really up to us how ambitious we want to be with this part. So I think with that, Lauren, if you want to give us a overview of the big projects on here, and especially anywhere you'd like feedback where your staff was, debating whether to put something in or leave something out or anything like that, it'd be good to have some insight on the ones where you'd like some guidance.
Great, that's fantastic. So generally, we try to approach the work into our team. We work in teams. So we have a clean mobility team, a built environment team. I suppose that I am the renewable team, but we're a team of one for me. That is kind of evolving and tends to be a catch-all position. And we work also in concert with the environmental board and getting input from them. So giving monthly updates, getting feedback, looking at scope. One thing I wanted to say is that the e-board has seen the scope of work and they did get a chance to provide some input. So that's been a great process, and town staff has been really gracious with their time too, just to look what was submitted. And my understanding is, go through each line with us and make sure that they're comfortable with it as well. So this, where we're headed is pretty interesting in that it seems to be serving the consulting role or the contractor role to support town staff in some initiatives is in the built environment is really a big chunk of what we want to be focusing on next year. So trying to take an approach of identifying where staff might be limited in capacity, whether it's from building code work, facilities management, tracking utility bills, researching grant opportunities, even project management, potentially up to issuing RFPs. So these are the things that I would say we're seeing that we would love and need to probably work with the town. We work with them on a monthly basis. Lauren and I have a meeting to expand that level of service. So the overall budget item that you're seeing, and we could circle back to that, really has to do one with expanded but refined level of services. So some new things this year, and also an increase in our cost of service. So our billing rates that we need to make as an organization to keep staff local has gone up, and we haven't actually increased our billing rates to the town in a while. And we're finding that in order to compete for any staff people to stay here, it just needs to happen. So the built environment, let's hop to it. We are, really looking at the path to net zero for new and existing buildings to set out some big benchmark goals to help guide the initiatives kind of every year. And we have listed a couple of things that have been outlined in the path to net zero that we think are kind of ready for prime time, I would say, to really look into those things. So a big one would actually be on this second one, so number 2 under the built environment. And this would be looking at pathways to require building energy assessments for existing buildings. And we ran a really successful pilot research program this year to offer free home energy assessments and figure out what tool could be usable for realtors, for property managers, for the general public, for town staff to do that. And what we came up with is that we're not there yet with what the right path forward is. And it's going to take some effort, I think, with the town and with you to come up with a few proposed alternatives for you all to consider, yay or nay. This seems like a good way forward, or this doesn't, when we're looking at, possibly mandated requirements for home energy assessments. It's complicated, and we want to do it right. So we'd love to really focus on that this year. So that's new, I would say.
Okay.
Any questions on that?
I guess sort of, I know we've already laid out these sort of potential triggers, but I guess at a certain point, it just becomes our job to enact an ordinance essentially. So we're looking for, I guess, more research and support for that from you. Is that effectively?
Yeah, exactly.
Or more specifically fine tuning how that gets?
Yeah, I would see it as working with the town manager and working with staff in a work session or 2 over the course of the next year to develop options for ways that an ordinance could go that you could vote on.
Yeah, because I feel like a lot of these things, we can keep you spinning your wheels, but a lot of times it requires us to make a move at some point.
Yeah.
And like, I mean, the 5th or 6th thing here, the heat pump thing, we've talked about that for 3 years. And of course we've I thought 2024 was going to be the year the federal grants were coming out. I thought we were going to have something maybe associated with that. I would be nice to have something associated with that next year. I do know that there was quite a bit of, when I came to the special CS session that they did on the new building codes with Jeff and Aaron, sorry. There was quite a bit of, or I mean, it was proposed by somebody else, but it was quite a bit of appeal to the idea of incentivizing heat pumps and disincentivizing gas hookups.
Yeah.
And I've been it's been a thing for me for a while, is I feel like it could be fairly simple adjustment of our fee schedule, essentially, to raise the price on getting that gas hookup and potentially use those funds to whatever comes of that. Or maybe we add a little bit of money from our other funds or whatever to try to put some little level of inducement into heat pump stuff. I don't know if you're just seeing everybody is doing that anyway, or.
No, they're not. We have a lot of work still to do, and the industry is changing. The local contractor rates are high, so there's still a need for a financial push on that regard. I think the question is, can we come up with a well-crafted plan where little Carbondale isn't on the hook? It's a regional effort that's really informed by what's going on with the utilities and availability for state financing per heat pump to pay for things. So I would put this in the category of 6 months of getting to a good proposed, an ordinance or a change in how the fee schedule goes, and give you all something to vote on, probably.
I would really like to see something like that by the end of the year. I just feel like we've sort of talked about it, but it's been like in this sort of not high level, not nitty gritty. It's in this middle level where we think we're doing something, but we're not actually doing anything. We're making goals and things, but we're not actually like making any rules or anything that might actually take us there. So.
Yeah. Well, I'll just jump in real quick too, because I think that one of the missing components that I would be hesitant to just say we're making a rule now is I would want to make sure that we have the contractors in place to actually do the work. Because I know that's been one of the hangups is there's so few contractors that it does cost even a $2,000 rebate that we might provide. Somebody still has to come up with that $16,000, to cover the cost or whatever it might be. Like, it's not an apples to apples comparison. And so if we were to implement a rule that made it more expensive for people to meet a requirement, and we don't have the trades to do the work, I would want to have some assurance as part of the outreach and the work that the contractors are in place who know how to do the work and will install really good systems. Because there are systems being installed that are not performing as they are supposed to because people are rushing or they're not as well trained, so it's not as easy as just saying, oh, there's a bunch out there and there's a bunch of contractors ready to do the work. Let's enforce it now. So I would want to make sure we're not creating an undue burden on people, or they just can't simply get the work done. Like, it could hold up a project for months to not be able to get a contractor to do the work.
Jess?
Yeah, I appreciate that.
I would just echo that. We've had clients ask us to put heat pumps in, and it's really hard to get contractors, subs that have the knowledge to do it, who have done it before. And it really does drive the cost up on a project a lot. And there's bigger lead times on heat pumps. So it's much easier to get an electric boiler or a gas fired appliance. So I think that it's definitely something we should be looking at, but I would agree that I don't know that the industry is there yet. It's really hard in this valley. It's really hard. HVAC and plumbers are really hard to come by anyway. And then you add in that specialized.
Well, then should we strike that from the goals? I mean, I don't want us to put them through meaningless work if you get to the end of it and you can't do it. I mean, that pisses me off.
Well, I think that's one of my questions that I think CLEER would be evaluating, which they've been doing for years, of doing workforce training or just reaching out. I mean, they've got great contacts in the industry and seeing what the capacity is. I wouldn't say strike it, because it's something we can still work towards. It's still a goal. We can't control, and CLEER can't control what is happening out in the trades. I mean, it's so.
Well, I don't know. I don't think we can control, but I do think there is. I mean, I know we've talked a little bit about this, and maybe Christina has some insight on this, that I know people have floated CMC as a potential partner in terms of trying to develop the trades side of this equation. Maybe not next year, but
Right.
in
That's
5
the-
years.
Mhm.
I don't know if that's something that's in your guys' thought round wheelhouse or not. Maybe you want to.
I know that just from being the liaison to the CLEER Garfield Clean Energy Board, CMC is doing a program where they're trying to do workforce training for electric vehicle maintenance, mechanics. So I think CMC is like working toward that, but it's a hard thing to do. So they're bringing in like high schoolers, they're doing an AutoCAD program, but with a focus on electric vehicles.
I mean, I think, the question before is, this is great to have these discussions. I think if we think this is still worth pursuing in some way, that's part of the contract. If we think, right, like trying to figure this out, what can we do to move heat pumps more toward accessibility and affordability at the local level? And the answer might be the industry's not there yet, the trades aren't there yet. And that's probably, Chris, why it's been in kind of that middle realm, because I agree with you. It's not just a high level idea, but it hasn't been brought to us with a detailed proposal. And I think that's like, we're watching an industry mature in real time, and we want it to speed up.
Yeah.
And so, between the federal funds and various state projects and all that, I think that's what CLEAR is really good at, is figuring out what's our lever that we could pull, or is it wait another year? But
And I just think it's doubly frustrating when then somebody's made a major investment in a gas line and all of that infrastructure. They're not going to take that out for 25 years. So there goes that house for, forever.
Well, then that's new construction. There are existing gas lines. And so I think part of the program is to incentivize somebody changing their existing heating system. It's time for an upgrade. Their home was built in the 70s and maybe they're running off an electric boiler or an electric furnace, and now's the time for a heat pump or whatever it is, or a gas furnace. So I think this isn't just about new construction. This is, if I'm reading it right, like it's just exploring a regional kind of rebate or incentive program, along with maybe there would be code requirements up above, but I just think it's not all about new construction. We have a lot of existing buildings that need to be upgraded, and that's where CLEAR brings a ton of expertise and has a lot of proposals in here.
I guess item 2 in here is develop proposed pathways to require building energy assessments. So if we're requiring the assessments, but we don't really have, I assume you get a report after your assessment, but if we aren't requiring anything to change, there's a little bit of a disconnect there. I would hesitate to put a lot of money and effort into convincing people who otherwise might not choose to have an assessment to welcome an assessment of sorts in, only to then be sad, to not have a solution if they want to go on their own to be a better citizen and human existing on the earth person, or whether we need to put the compliance and the ordinance element first before we encourage more assessments. Am I not getting some sort of connection between one and the other?
do you want to give us the big picture on that? Because we had a lot of discussion about that. I think it was about 2 years ago, about this, what the triggers would be and the value of having a score, and that's the first step toward maybe some eventual mandates, but that it would start. I imagine it like the miles per gallon rating the federal government requires on every car, so you can be an informed buyer, even if they're not requiring everyone to hit a certain target that year. But do you want to add anything to kind of the vision of that part of the work?
Sure. So we discussed a little bit, for one, this is a very good point. You're hitting the nail on the head. If we're not going to have anything that's triggered from a compliance perspective to make improvements, what is the purpose? But I think Ben's correct, is right now we just want more properties to have full disclosure on the state of the property and the state of the energy use there. So what we saw this year is that we had a lot of participation from households who probably would voluntarily do it anyways. And they were taking advantage of a professional option for doing it provided by the town. They got good information. We're in the process of contacting them to see, hey, Did you do anything? Would you like to get some resources to make those upgrades? So there, it's an incremental kind of process, but it informs us as a community, and particularly, I think, as a home buyer or renter, what you're kind of getting into with your house. And there are no other ways to find that out, because a typical audit there, I'm sorry, oh my gosh, where is this keeping me? Thank you.
Like appraisal?
Inspection. Thank you. Appraisal. No, inspection. And it's, I'm so sorry. There's a million words going on.
Right, it's a work session. We can do
A
this.
typical inspection, you either pay additional for that, or you're gonna have a home inspector who really is not trained in like everything that you would know. And more importantly, it doesn't have that mile per gallon standardized type of score.
That makes a
that
lot of,
you can
that makes a lot of sense to me.
understand.
Yeah, and I, in those terms, especially if it's like a sale situation,
Yeah.
and that being the trigger, that actually
Yeah.
makes a lot of sense.
What I am hearing from you all is that this is very interesting to you, and that you might want us to come back with a more refined work plan at the beginning of 2025 that really meets the intentions of working on our trade ally program, working to have these things best fit the town. And again, setting kind of the research basis so that you can make an informed decision if and when you want to pass ordinances.
Yeah, and I think a annual update like that shows us like, here was our work plan from last year. Here's what we checked off. Here's what we researched and decided not to move forward with, like we were just talking about with heat pump rebates. And then here's what we proposed for the year, I think. And it's that, we've had board turnover. So those of us who were here to develop a lot of that pathway to net zero, like this is on that roadmap to net zero, is the energy scores being optional and then being required. And so we're kind of moving from optional to maybe required. And then whether you mandate anything happens from that, or whether it's just an opportunity where you get this great information and it says, and here's access to rebates and support to do this one upgrade that'll make your score this much better and your, bills this much lower and all that. So yeah, I think another work plan kind of meeting early in the new year sounds like a good plan.
And that would be, we'd love to do that. And
Yeah, but great questions to kind of air some of this
I could be
out.
convinced that should definitely happen before any sale, or, I mean, I think that'd be
Yeah, those are the kinds of
right,
triggers
yeah, I mean,
we've
that would
talked
be
about.
that would make sense. to me.
Yeah.
Can I be the devil's advocate? I would be interested in understanding, as a new member to the board, we have this path to net zero. What does that mean? Like, I know I've seen the work plan, but there's a lot of talk in the construction industry about that net zero is just a buzzword. And like, what does that actually mean to the town of Carbondale? What are the benchmark scores for us to determine, like, what does the end game actually look like? What is net zero? Is that our energy grid is 100% solar or sustainable or whatever? Like, I would be interested to understand what we mean.
So I would suggest that we either have a memo that I can send to you with the most recent versions of the Path to Net Zero plan that was adopted by the trustees for existing and new construction.
I've seen that.
And then however you all would like to tackle that, I think in a meaningful way, because this is a really important question, and I deal with it philosophically on greening the grid as well all the time. Like, are we talking RECs, local solar, utility solar, all of these questions? How would you like to, what would be best serve the board to kind of have that conversation?
I have an idea. I think, we were just talking about, maybe we have a more in-depth work session where we go through a work plan, but we also review the Path to Net Zero documents and just talk about how we got there. But then also, I can't remember what was in, I know our work plans have included kind of the energy inventory updates. So also having that information in front of us, just as a refresher of like, here's the data that's been collected since, 26 and then 2014 aggressively of just here was how much energy we use in our built environment, at least. It doesn't really include transportation in a meaningful way. Just to kind of review all that, because I feel like we're at a good point and kind of, and then it gets to what we've done and then what makes sense going forward. So we also feel really good about it and don't feel like we're getting frustrated with the challenges that are ahead of us and kind of, there might be other priorities that come out of it. At least I could see that being, I would enjoy it, but.
I just would like to understand
Your
at the end of
questions.
the day, what,
You're sort of, go on.
at the end of the day.
Yeah.
If we're net zero.
Mhm.
Does that, I want to know what that means.
Like, where's the edge of that? Like, are you getting down to embodied carbon and transportation stuff, or are you just doing in the building environment?
All of it, like we're saying we're on this path to net zero and we've implemented, we have a plan.
Mhm.
And I've looked at it and I've seen like what that means for the built environment and all of those things, but it's like Aspen has this whole move to electrification, and we've talked about that here. And they say they're 100% green grid up there. And I mean, we could argue whether that's really real. And so I just want to know, and they're running into issues with their grid.
Well, I haven't heard about that, and I don't know that.
I don't think that's it. I don't think that's an issue here for us because it's Excel and Holy Cross. We're not running an electrical utility, but I just want to know what it means when we say we're going to net zero.
Sounds like a good topic for a bigger
February work
discussion.
session.
February work session.
Yes.
It can mean many things to different people.
Yeah.
And I think understanding that it might not be a mathematical equation that we get to,
For sure.
but it's a goal that we're working towards. And so that's where I think making sure we're using the language,
Defining that.
yeah, how we're defining it and that we're doing our part. Cause yeah, it is very complicated. And once you get into all the different renewable options and how that is showing up on the grid, it's not straightforward, and you're totally correct about Aspen, but yeah, so I think, and I just think that could be
And I'm
really
not-
interesting for us.
I'm not trying to like derail the path to net zero that Carbondale is on. Like that's the decision we've made. I just want to know what
Yeah.
that means.
I mean, we haven't had an in-depth discussion about it since,
Um,
for a couple of years, yeah.
Yeah, the climate action plan. There was the original adoption of that, and then there was like an update, and then we added the path to net zero, and now there's been
Yeah.
work going on and kind of coming back to us piecemeal. So that seems like a good
Yeah,
thing to do.
and I think you made a good point. I think probably what's true, we have fallen victim a little bit to sort of buzzwordification. But I think net zero is a huge concept that in some ways becomes deeply existential and philosophical. I mean, what is a net zero life? Is that like a life that had no meaning at the end or whatever? So I mean, you could get real deep if you want. So I'm sure we're not trying to get there. I think it is more about like, we have this ideal out there and we're chiseling away at this Mount Rushmore or whatever, and we've got Lincoln's nose done or whatever.
Yeah, yeah. And I just want a better understanding.
The most
right.
interesting budget conversation I've
Go ahead, and then I want to keep us moving forward because we've got quite a few sections of this work plan and we're still in section 1.
Sure, I just want to say I went to that same meeting that Chris is talking about, the green code, and I took a developer, a small developer who maybe builds 2 to 3 houses a year. And it was interesting because a lot of and I brought him more in the industry than I am. And a lot of the feedback, again, he's a smaller developer, but he said, all this is great, but it's costly. And it's now costing in basalt about $1 million to build a house. And so like, if you want to do a new build, I'm thinking, who's going to build like the common work? Like after that, I was like, I don't know if I ever want to build a house in Carbondale, and I think the big part where I see CLEER coming in is, especially like, for example, the EV charging spaces that we want at least 20% of the parking spaces to be EV ready. Like, how can I go to CLEER and say, okay, well, or present it to the community, like we're gonna expect this, but then CLEER has these opportunities to help us get through that. So that's what I would like to see more. Yeah, and I mean, net zero, green, I know, and a lot of it comes from the state of Colorado too, and I know we try to follow that, but I echo what everybody else says, but I just wanted to say that for CLEERs, I would like to see more like, okay, well, how can you help the community reach those high goals that we have with the green codes? But thank you.
Yep, noted. Thank you all. It sounds like, not to belabor this, but if we skip down to number 2, carbon-free electricity and greenhouse gas emissions before February work sessions, if we could accomplish, and I'd have to talk to the team, but update our emissions inventory. Really, instead of focusing necessarily on rooftop solar, we feel like our emissions inventory needs to be updated. It's out of date, and that was something that we're proposing. It might be useful to inform a work session in February. So I could go through channels to get back to Lauren on whether that's feasible. Probably is. It wouldn't include transportation emissions.
It would or would not?
Probably not.
Probably not. Okay.
Yeah. But it could be buildings, and the question is it town facilities or community-wide? We're able to pull data from Excel and from Holy Cross. So it just kind of depends when they're able to get us the data from the year before, if it's useful still.
I was gonna say, it probably wouldn't include 2024.
Yeah.
It would just be, because that data is not usually available till like June or July.
June,
But
yeah.
yeah.
Yep, excellent point. So
think-
just knowing if we do a February work session, we can go with old data and just have some of these big picture topics and come back for later in the year work session when we have an updated numbers from the utilities as an option. So, yeah. Let's see.
Real quick, Lauren, yep, the only thing I would add to the section 1 as well is just some clarity on how the services delivered through our contract are above and beyond the services that we get with GCE. Because just reading based on what's here, it seems a little bit duplicative of what we get with residential and commercial support, and then the support for our the active energy management with our town of Carbondale buildings. So I would just want to see a little bit more clarity to make sure we're getting, because we contribute quite a bit to GCE. We contribute more than Newcastle, Rifle, Silt, Parachute combined. So I just want to make sure we're putting our dollars to stuff that's like above and beyond the service contract that we get there.
Yeah, absolutely. So actually in B here, the AEM service, what's listed here, and I would potentially even defer to Ben has probably more experience with the AEM Advanced Energy Management Service than I do, because I'm not on that team, but these 3 things listed here are above and beyond what the GCE service, the basic level, does provide. And so certainly I think we have seen with the rec center and town hall some pretty big like miss billings that they take effort with Excel to contact the account manager, to figure out how to rectify them, to go through past years. It's a process to be an advocate for the town. So that level of service is not something that we can provide to every GCE member at the basic level. But Erica, I'd love to maybe hear from you again, and I can do this as soon as feasible if you want, to have our Christina Matzel, who does AEM for us in GCE. We could send a quick email back to clarify more even.
Well, and it might be helpful just after we see the GCE scope of work too, because we haven't seen that before this, you know.
Great.
So
Okay,
just-
so maybe we can
Yeah.
star them and flag it different, but include this, so you know.
Yeah, I think that'd be great.
Okay, let's keep going. Anything else you wanted to highlight, Lauren?
Yes, so this is why buildings is so big. We're still, I wanted to point out that C, so looking at
C under which number? There's a lot.
this is, we're
1C.
still on
We're still on
one.
one,
They're
okay.
still on one, but we've maybe skipped to 2 and come back.
Okay.
It's really important that the town gets support in grant writing and looking at funding for facilities planning and without a full-time facilities manager for every building, things can really get lost. So if a boiler kicks the bucket and nobody was expecting it, there isn't adequate funding to replace it with a piece of equipment, for example, that would meet the town's identified goals of electrifying or reducing use. And now everybody's scrambling. So this is an area that we've identified with staff that if they're able to bring a part-time facilities manager or identify some staff member who's going to be tasked with more facilities management, that we could really work with them to create kind of a best practices schedule and work plan, identified resources, and go ahead and look at some of those pieces of equipment and some capital planning. So this is definitely new, this portion of buildings. And I would solidly put this in kind of what you would contract out a service for. And it's completely up to town staff as far as how they want to manage this, what suits their needs. Lauren, can you add a little more to this?
Well, this is happening on a number of different levels. The first thing is that we do have a dedicated facilities manager at the rec center. One of the new staff members that we are looking at, their job will be facilities management for the town hall. Where we end up scrambling is Launchpad, right? But also, we are doing a review of all of our buildings for capital needs over the next 10 years. And so frankly, I'm a little torn about this particular section because I'm not sure what it's going to look like because of some of these other new things that are coming in. We do use CLEER when we are, for example, we have an issue right now with the launch pad and their heating system, heating and air conditioning, their HVAC, and they could have just, hey, it's broken, we can just replace it. But now we're having this big conversation about heat pumps and electrification over there. And that was not the building we were going to do next. But we also want them to have heat because it is October. So we are working on that, and we have tapped CLEER, right? I mean, Heidi is helping us substantially on that. But I'm just not sure exactly what this particular piece of the work plan is going to be structured as.
Sorry, we're having this conversation in public right now. It's not
That's
very big.
okay.
It's not very big, but it's new and
Yeah.
it's important. So it's identifying when staff is, the Launchpad is basically the example that brought this to the head. It's like, okay, Aaron does not have time to go get bids for a heat pump. He doesn't have time to deal with bringing electrician. I mean, this is a big process, and anyone in the construction industry knows. We have site visits, vetting bids, are we putting this out to RFP?
Right.
All of these things. And so it's a way that was really not in our scope for last year that we feel like is very important, right? This is a piece of equipment that's gonna last a long time. So somebody to help ride herd, put together a plan to assist the town when things like this happen is something that we just haven't done before, and we're seeing it could be needed. And I would just leave it up to staff to direct us, like what is useful and what is not, depending on.
I see this being very, or having the potential to be very helpful as we are developing a 10-year capital, going farther out with our capital improvement plan and developing a capital budget for the next 5 years. Not for everything, but certainly for the things that are environmentally or energy related.
Great.
Okay. I'm so sorry, this is taking long. We could just.
That's okay. I
go
mean,
through.
anything else you wanted to highlight? I think most of
Yeah.
these are existing work that we're continuing with. I mean, the turf outreach, the supporting the e-board, clean mobility. The one that I always question is the actual value of the big events, and we've talked about that before, whether that's worth putting much money toward. But in general, this is kind of your fairly typical scope of work.
On the mobility component, I was one of my questions is also just clarifying how that is above and beyond what's in the, GCE transportation work as well. Cause I think our residents benefit from an EV ride and drive in Glenwood as well. So I don't feel attachment to like us having to host one. But the town of Carbondale is doing a lot of really great mobility stuff, including, funding WeCycle and the Downtowner. And I think it would be, CLEER does a fantastic job of outreach and, we could get your help in kind of continuing to promote those and just making sure people understand that as another mobility option. So kind of one of my ideas was adding, promoting those new services that the town's providing in the like either communications line or in the mobility line. Cause I'm really proud of it and think it's really exciting
That's a
and
good
think it's a
idea.
huge benefit to the community. And we could use the help, like just getting the word out.
Sounds great. I would say that those two lines in 3, A and B, are perhaps the most general of all of the line items intentionally, because the GCE scope isn't fully ready. We're waiting to hear what support the state is actually going to be able to provide, really, when we're talking about like infrastructure level investments for EV charging. And most likely the planning process involved in that is at the town to make like a meaningful progress in the plan is beyond what a general GCE scope would cover. So I would say this is very much up to working with you all on what best suits the town next year.
Okay, yeah, Chris.
I like what you just said. I think I'm not super wedded to events either. I think the outreach sounds great. I do think I don't know, we'll see. We're doing this, mobility access plan, which is gonna have all kinds of recommendations come out of it. And I don't know, some of them, maybe some of the smaller projects, and I'm not sure how comfortable y'all would be in that realm of say maybe more traditional grant assistance around transportation stuff. But I think there is room for that to be pretty significant for us potentially if we want to have some more assistance in terms of looking at grants to go the next step in planning some more of these projects and stuff. So, I would emphasize that, or at least keep that in your mind as something that could potentially be a bigger, be most of that, I don't know, work. So I don't know.
Yeah, we've definitely expressed a lot of interest on the board and at the staff level, I think, in pursuing all the money that we keep hearing is out there and doing that in the most sophisticated, coordinated way that we can. And so if CLEER is our consultant to do that in the energy realm, and then somebody else is to do it in Parks and Rec and Public Works types of, capital projects, that could work. Anybody, so I have one quick question and then maybe just see if there's kind of wrap this up with like anything that we want staff and CLEER to work on and come back with any updates to this. How are we billed for this? Like with things that it's not really clear, is that like, if that work happens, then we're billed for it. And if that work doesn't happen, then we're not? Okay.
On a monthly basis.
Yeah.
So we send a monthly invoice
Okay.
to the town
For work that was performed.
for work that
Yeah.
was performed. And it's billed by, so the tasks that you see here, 1 through 5 this year, each have a line item so that Lauren's able to see by line item.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, it's just good to know. So like if there's something in here and then we decide not to move forward with it, that's okay. We budgeted for it. We didn't spend it. So this is sort of a maximum not to exceed type of budget.
On the turf replacement, do we know how much money is in that program? I thought we only had $8,000 in it to pay out this year, didn't we? Or
It's pretty small and the state grant matched it. So it was either 8 and 8 or 12 and 12. It was somewhere in that range.
I guess the outreach is going to be expensive no matter what, but it does seem sort of
Yeah.
disproportionate to the actual amount of money we have to give away. But we've had, it seems like things did taper off a little bit in terms of interest.
I'm realizing as I read this that back to finding the money, one thing we've talked about is we can't spend a ton of time doing it, but certainly because we're doing Glenwood's program, working to identify in a timely manner what grant other funding opportunities could grow the program. So that I would probably have that as an addition to that. And this actually came from the environmental board, just a request for, and this could be social media, this can be flyers, marketing materials. So really just like, they don't have time to produce that level of documents and marketing for this. But certainly helping to keeping our eye out for growing the pot is part of that.
I think that program in particular is a great program, suffered from sort of a lack of professional marketing. And it wouldn't be that hard, I don't think, to have
Turf replacement.
what's it, the turf replacement, yeah, to pay a design firm a little, a day's work or something to really put together something that jumps out at people a little bit more. I remember sort of seeing some flyers and knowing the program and not realizing what it was until I kind of got into line 15 or something, when it's like cash for your grass, or, something along those lines, green for your green, and, or, any sort of thing that would really kind of make that a little bit jumpier. And it looks like that's what we're talking about here. So I would, in terms of maybe quality over quantity even,
Yeah.
just a thought, because I think it's a great little program.
We design the materials and the tools, they may very well have a pretty long shelf life.
Yeah.
Where next year, this line item doesn't need to be this, or it gets used to bump up the pool of funds because it's so successful. Yeah.
I'm having a hard time summarizing, so I hope that you've kind of taken note, but I'm not hearing pushback on any major direction. It sounds like we've got some questions about what's in GCE's scope of work versus what's in the town of Carbondale's. It sounds like we'll get clarity on that as GCE comes in. There's some things that'll be worked out between CLEER and staff to either move forward or not. And then it sounds like we just want to educate ourselves and get ourselves up to speed on the path to net zero and all the different elements of that as we work together. But I'm not hearing big concerns about the total scope, the total amount in the budget. Lauren has this in our draft budget as well as everything else. So, if we start adding a lot of other stuff and we need to come back and cut, I imagine we could cut a few things here, but I don't see us making a huge change in this. Okay, yeah, Erica.
Two things real quick. You do not have to have Christina go do an inventory for us for February. I mean, if it's easy and she already has the data from other inventories, but I just know that can be a little bit of a headache to do last minute. And then we didn't really touch on it, but I would say if we get the geothermal grant, there'll be a lot on CLEER's plate and your plate in particular. And so I'd be willing to kind of revisit all of this to be like, okay, you guys have a capacity, we have a capacity, maybe we don't do everything and it's just all going to, whatever's needed for geothermal, and maybe we have to add more. So I just wanted to put that out there, that I feel like it's mentioned a little bit in here, but that's kind of the elephant in the room, that if it moves forward, I'm sure that changes your life. But I think it would change our capacity and our staff's capacity to do a lot of this stuff too. So yeah, I just wanted to throw that out there.
Okay, anything else? All right, thanks for the deep dive.
Yeah.
I'm actually not finished with you all.
Yeah, I was gonna say, there's another
Oh, there's
thing
one
in
more
here.
thing, the local match
Oh,
letter.
Let's just be quick with it, because I know we have people waiting for the next time.
Yep. All right. So I am not the project manager. I would like to say, and I'm very happy to come back at a different time and write down your questions that we have right now. But we have an exciting opportunity that originated from City of Glenwood in partnership with CLEER to work to create a transportation management organization. So just acknowledging that RAFTA is in its lane. Mobility options can sometimes be in a different lane. And then you add CDOT and complicated infrastructure projects and all kinds of entities that really should be brought to the table in an organized fashion to look at planning efforts. And this is what Glenwood and CDOT are really wanting to do. So we are going to every town that's affected by Glenwood traffic right now and requesting a local match of some capacity to assist the effort to create this pilot TMO. That is the takeaway. Glenwood Springs is contributing $20,000. CDOT is contributing $100,000. And we are making requests to other municipalities in the county as well, just to be able for the effort to support bringing the consultants and expertise we need to the table to get this done. Because probably $100,000 is not really enough when you're talking about something that complicated. So CLEER is requesting as a completely separate from our scope of work that we just discussed, if the town would consider a $10,000 local match to the TMO effort. We do not need a decision tonight, but we certainly would love to gauge your interest and be able to, get an answer at some point in the next month or two.
Okay, questions, thoughts, yeah?
Just a comment, since I'm the RAFTA rep, and RAFTA is going to be talking about a match for this as well. One of the key components of this grant is to work with Streetlight, which does traffic data. So we'd essentially be able to get an origin and destination study that would include Carbondale, and we know who's coming, where, and why, and when. All kind of information that RAFTA really doesn't have access to. Glenwood did some of this work. This would be expanding on that, and it would be really valuable, not only from RAFTA's perspective, wearing that hat, but then putting on the town hat of understanding the 133 issue. Where are people coming from? Why are they coming? When are they coming? And the Streetlight data, I got to participate in a Zoom call with them, and it's really impressive what they can do. And this is all information we don't have right now. We've got traffic counts, we've got bus ridership, but we don't have the interconnected way of showing heat maps and where people are going. It's also really, having been at the meeting in Silt, a really interesting opportunity to engage the Colorado River Valley in ways that we haven't in the past, because they don't know anything either about how people are leaving and moving in their communities. So this is a really neat pilot to not only work amongst local governments, but also the business community, the chambers, and how do we have a much more connected approach to understanding what's happening in our region in terms of transportation and traffic, as opposed to just anecdote. Oh, I was in traffic for 3 hours today and it's terrible, we should do something.
Can you just talk about the distinction is between the streetlight technology and that, what was it, phaser or something? that we-
Placer,
Placer.
yes. So Streetlight is much more advanced and much more transportation oriented.
Mhm.
So they do work for the city of New York, right?
Mhm.
Big cities,
Mhm.
huge cities. So they have a huge database. Placer is much more about economic chamber kind of things. They could overlap a little bit, but I think we're gonna get more information from Streetlight.
Okay.
I've talked with Andrea a bit about, do we need both?
Mhm.
So we'll see. We're gonna learn a lot with this effort, how valuable Streetlight can be, but from what I've seen, it's really impressive. And just so people know, we've done travel pattern studies 3 times, 1998, 2004, and 2014. And it is so hard to do because you have to hand surveys to people. You have to go to the hotels and hang little flyers and hope people will send them in. And we can do this electronically, and you can update it really quickly. So really kind of a neat project, and CDOT's really interested in helping build the capacity in our region. So I'm really excited about this because I think it'd answer a lot of our questions in town, but also from a RAFTA perspective, it could really help us think about the Colorado River Valley communities and how they might be part of all what we're doing.
Envision CLEER hiring a staff member or allocating, what is it, half of a staff member? What is the staff, your organizational commitment, I guess, to the organization. Because it's under the aegis of CLEER, or is it's could be a separate thing,
Separate.
separate thing. And CLEER is just assisting with the grant aspects of it.
Where my understanding is the plan is to facilitate managing the grant and coordinating the partnership entities to get it off the ground.
Mhm.
Project manage it for a year until it comes into being as a functional
And that would,
entity.
coming into being would probably be hiring a person.
Most likely, but I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know. I
It
think
won't
that's
happen by
probably part of the
itself.
planning question. Yeah.
And to be clear, the technology that Colin's talking about would be one part of this, but it's a
Yep.
larger scope, right?
Yes.
It's kind of a transportation demand management
Yep.
plan.
That you
And
need
that you need
information to
information,
explain to
okay.
people why you would need to do
Yeah.
all those other things.
I just want to be clear that like we're not just contracting to get that data, because if we just wanted that data, we could just go get that data, but this is a much bigger project.
We could, but it'd be more expensive.
Other thoughts? It sounds like we don't need an answer tonight, but staff probably needs some direction on whether to consider this in the budget and, you know, what other information we would need in order to.
Yeah, this is something I have not put in the budget.
Right.
This 10,000 is not in there.
Okay. Anybody opposed to considering this further?
It makes sense. I want to make sure that we're not duplicating efforts with the MAP plan. It sounds like maybe there'd be a little bit of an overlap at some point, maybe at 133 and 82. And, but maybe this is the kind of thing that would really inform some of those decisions because they're right around the bend as well.
Yeah, I wonder if it would help with our.
It might help a lot.
133 planning that we spent a lot of time talking about at our last meeting.
I'm wondering if it's going to leave the sight line of 82 at all. That's my question.
I don't think it will.
So maybe those are things we could find out and see if it would have kind of ulterior benefits for us as far as informing some of our other decisions where we're really focused on Highway 133. And if not, doesn't mean it's a no, but it means that then we're contributing wholly to be part of a regional effort. And that might change the number we're willing to contribute or something like that.
I'll see what information I can get to come back to the board.
Okay, anything else on this one?
Thank you.
Thanks, Lauren.
Thank you so much for your patience and
All right.
participation.
Thank
All right.
you. Let's take a 5-minute break and then we're going to talk about short-term rentals. I know that's what you're all here for. So thanks for being patient with
Sorry, be
us
careful.
and
No, be
we'll dive
careful
into
with
that in
that.
5 minutes.
I don't want anybody to trip. So where here would the CLEER be? Like what we've contributed last year? I know. I know. I'm always like, why can't this? Oh, good. Yeah. Okay, environment.
Yeah, I may ask if you don't tell me.
Okay,
Yeah, although I did see some.
so CLEER is part of the energy, 120, okay.
year was 80,000.
Same way, basically.
40,000.
There's so many more.
Okay,
That's what came up with
That's-
now.
So that's what confuses me when I was looking and interesting.
Just need to-
And I was like, this is such a small town, so is Collins like the ED?
Yes.
Okay, I was like, okay, interesting, okay, but it's like, here's CLEER and then here's GC, that's what you guys are talking about, GCE, is it the same thing? Yeah, so, but CLEER is also everywhere, it's not just Carbondale, right? And then that's what she was saying, so so she's also,
Garfield County Clean Energy is gonna come and present their work.
oh,
I don't know if it's next meeting or not.
but it seems like CLEER's managing it now. That's how I took it.
Very,
Because if you go, what is
But it
GCE?
is a different.
So this is powered by CLEER, programs and services.
They're the contractor. GCE does not have staff of their own. They have a contract. with CLEER.
It's so confusing. Why can't they just
But
be
it
one?
is 2 entities.
Well,
because GCE
CLEER is a climate organization. so
Okay.
we're not gonna get-
There's just, you pop out. Yeah.
Oh. Well, then what's the Garfield, so what's the difference between CLEER and Garfield County? Or Garfield,
Garfield
clean,
Energy
yeah.
Is, Garfield Clean Energy is a government entity. It is a
Oh, okay.
designated government entity.
And CLEER's a nonprofit.
And CLEER is a
CLEER is
contractor
nonprofit organization
helping to run that.
Oh, okay.
GCE is higher, we hire every year, it's a contract.
Yeah.
To be their staff.
Okay.
Because it would be way more expensive for GCE. They could have their own staff,
Uh-huh.
but they would then put all their resources. into,
Yeah.
You know, like 2 staff.
Okay.
Instead, they get to hire a consulting firm that has a team of experts.
Gotcha.
And
Kind
CLEER
Okay.
of like we could have a sustainability
Yeah.
director, but we
instead-
wouldn't be able to do all those things.
I just
CLEER has
think on the
contracts,
finance
just-
side, it's
the
just
other-
confusing because CLEER comes to us for money and then GCE comes for us for money.
It
but-
took me like 5 years.
Okay,
to
thank
actually-
you. I'm like, this is.
Until
so-
I sat on the GC board, that's when I got it. I was like,
Oh,
oh, now
And
I
just
see
remember,
it.
CLEER isn't just coming and saying, give us $110,000.
Yeah.
It's a contract and a scope of work. They bill monthly. If they don't do something, they don't get paid,
Okay,
you know?
yeah, and that's, somebody
Whereas
said that and I
like
was like, oh,
Our
okay.
GCE contribution, we
It's
give that
just-
to the organization.
And that's
they-
it.
they run,
Okay.
just like we
Okay.
do our other contributions. Yes.
That makes,
And
that
the other
makes
thing
a
that I
little
think
bit more
helps
sense.
is CLEER has contracts with the Colorado Department of Public Education or Public Health. CLEER has contracts with Eagle County.
Okay.
CLEER has contracts with CMC
Mhm.
for all of
Yeah.
it. So they are, this isn't, they can't merge because
Yeah,
there's.
gotcha. Okay. I'll think of them as a consulting.
Yeah, they are. a consultant.
Okay.
Okay, well, that was a short, less than 5 minute break, but we're all back. So I sense that we want to keep moving forward. So our final item on the agenda this evening is just a discussion. We've committed to doing this periodically and about short-term rentals. And the last time we discussed it, we said, let's consider opening the door a bit more to additional rentals. So maybe Lauren, you could give us kind of a quick overview of where we are and the staff recommendation. I'd love to hear from the folks that are here. And then we can discuss and give some guidance on whether we're ready to take next steps or whether we need more information or more discussion or whether we just want to leave it as is.
Certainly. I gave much of this memo that is in this packet is almost identical to the memo from the July meeting where we talked about this at the first, for the first time this year, mostly because it just restates the history so that you don't have to go back and look all over again. One of the numbers was changed. We had 35 short-term rentals that were licensed in July. We have 40 now. The highest that we have had has been about 76. And that has dropped substantially in the last year, partly because River Valley Ranch has banned short-term rentals. And we suspect that there have been some real estate transfers and licenses do not transfer. So if a house gets sold and it was being used or licensed as a short-term rental, the new owners do not automatically get a license. And they may not qualify for a license. So one of the things, there are kind of two competing values here that we've talked about over the past few years. One is the sort of perceived tension between short-term rentals and availability of long-term rentals and affordable rentals, particularly with ADUs in Carbondale. I know that was a big fear when we first talked about it in early 22 when I first got here. The board was very, very careful to try to be as controlled as possible in issuing short-term rental licenses to see, what the side effects were, so to speak. And it turned out when we finally got the data and we started licensing and we found out, how many owners were licensing multiple properties, how many people were getting licensed when they were not full-time residents, et cetera, that it wasn't, or it did not appear to be as big of an issue as I think some people were concerned that it might be. The other competing value is that the short-term rental tax that was instituted is a revenue source that pays for a couple of different things. First of all, it pays for the program itself. The online applications, the compliance piece. We pay a software company every year for that, and that it gets paid out of the short-term rental tax. Short-term rental tax proceeds go into the Carbondale Affordable Housing Fund, and anything that is not spent on expenses for short-term rental licensing and in compliance gets put towards affordable housing or employee housing or other things that can be paid for out of that fund. Of course, we haven't really spent any of it yet. We're trying to save it up because it's not a lot of money every year. So when we were first talking about licensing short-term rentals in Carbondale, there was a lot of discussion about how many was too many, how many, was just enough. What did we expect the numbers were going to be? And most of our conversations revolved around sort of an assumption that there might be 80 to 100. And was that the right number? Would that be too many? What have you? We really didn't know until we opened up the licensing. And then we ended up with 71 to 76 at its height. We've looked, I apologize for the mess that is the CAST short-term rental matrix, because it has a lot of information on it. It's near impossible to read, but I could not get it to be a PDF that could be read on more than 5 sheets of paper laid side by side or what have you. But I took, so that you didn't have to, I took some information off of it to give you some examples of what other municipalities are doing with regard to numbers of short-term rentals, because I think, and you can correct me if I'm not right, I think that that's still going to be the issue, is what is the right number, right? How do we control so that it's not a runaway train, but we are able to provide the lodging opportunities to help promote our economic development, help, not lose the lodging opportunities to, let's say, Willits. I don't even, how many hotels they have in Willits now? 3. And so, if you're staying in Willits, then where are you likely eating? In Willits, right? So in the 2020 census, Carbondale had 2,780 households. Obviously, we've had some development since then. There have been at least 4 apartment buildings that have been constructed and finalized since then, and there have been some other properties in Thompson Park and various single-family residences in other parts of town. I just took a wild guess and said maybe there are 150 additional households in Carbondale. So that would put us at 2,930 households. If we had a cap of 100 total short-term rental licenses that could be issued every year, that would be about 3.5% of that number. What the recommendation in the memo is that we continue to keep the historic commercial core zone district, unlimited short-term rentals. You want a short-term rental, you have a right to a short-term rental license as long as you can meet the other criteria as of right in that zone district. And also, if the property is your principal residence, meaning you live on the property full-time, maybe it's an ADU or something that gets rented out, or if you do what a friend of mine just did as she goes to Eastern Europe to visit her kids for several months, she just got a short-term rental license, even though she lives here 12 months of the year, but this year it'll only be 9 months of the year. So she's going to short-term rent for that extra 3 months. So that would also be an unlimited availability. If it's your principal residence and you live in it for more than 181 days, in a year, I saw you wondering what that definition was, Russ, then you have a right to a short-term rental license as long as, you know, you have egress windows and smoke detectors, et cetera. So we sort of estimated, okay, so maybe you have, you know, 50 more short-term rental licenses that are available above and beyond what we have right now for people who are in other zone districts. Obviously, we are not going to be the police of whether or not a PUD allows short-term rentals. I know that Erica's doesn't, but then again, you don't really have a structure, a homeowners association that controls these things. But when we get an application for a short-term rental license, we don't go ask the PUD. I mean, at some point, that may be a thing, but we're not doing that right now. But to give you an example of what some other municipalities have for numbers of short-term rentals, and I didn't pick Telluride, and I didn't pick Crested Butte or Ouray, or, you know, even Aspen. I have their number, but they're just not comparable to us and what we want as far as percentages. I'll start with the highest one that I picked out as an example. Aspen has 18.9% short-term rentals. Snowmass has 16.8%. And this is as of the last CAST survey. It's not completely up to date. Avon has 8.3%. Salida has 3.5%, as I'm getting closer to towns that are more like us. And Glenwood Springs has 2.3%. I don't have Basalt's numbers or Garfield County's numbers or what have you, because they're not members of CAST that reported their information. So for us, 50 additional short-term rental licenses that are outside of HCC or principal residences is still only 1.7%. And if we cap it at 100 total licenses, it's 3.5. So that seemed to me to be a reasonable number. I'm interested to know what the board feels is a reasonable number and whether you are still interested in entertaining that.
Great. Thanks, Lauren. It's a work session, so it's informal, but out of respect for the people that are here, I want to get to their comments as quick as we can. So just a couple of clarifying questions before we start to say what we think about all this. Anything you want to clarify from kind of what Lauren just presented?
I guess my only thing is, so you have you're not proposing to do any limits on HCC or primary residence, but you'd have 100 total. So that would mean you would theoretically have a floating number of second homes.
Mm-hmm.
And so have we sort of engaged in the thought process of what happens if we do have an over demand on that side of the equation and we come to 2 years, you know, renewal date or whatever for a bunch of people and there's more primary residents? I guess you just have to give second homeowners, they have to know upfront that you might lose this in 2 years, basically. And then if there are too many, do you do a lottery or?
We did have a conversation about that. We haven't quite decided how that should be managed yet, but we would need to write something into the regulation that talks about how we would manage that. If 100 was the cap. If the cap was, and this is another option, unlimited number in the HCC and unlimited number for your principal residence and a cap of 50 that are not in that, you know, that are either in a Dunner zone district or what have you. But you still have the issue of, do you have a waiting list? If you have 50 people that have short-term licenses that are not their principal residence or in outside zone district, then could people just be on the waiting list forever? Because if you already have a license, then you have a right to renew it. So we're sort of conversing about that.
Okay,
Yeah.
so there'd be some logistics to work out, but we got to clarify where we want to head, and then we can figure out how to manage the details of that. Any other clarifying questions before we hear from folks? Okay. We'd love to hear from you all. So, I mean, it's not as formal as a normal public hearing. You're welcome to come sit down here or stand at the podium and just tell us who you are and your thoughts on this. Essentially, the proposal on the table is to open the door to some licenses that are not primary residences and not an HCC, which we do not have an open door to now. So yeah, come on up, please. Just good to use the mic and introduce yourself for the record, please. Wherever you want to be.
Boom, there you go.
Nina Peterson, I'm HTC. I really don't have a concern per se, but you mentioned percentages and you mentioned census at a certain amount that's now at least 150 more residences. Why don't we just establish a percentage, not a cap count? Because I don't think we're going to stop growing. I mean, it's just growing is happening, and a percentage. I don't think that you can throw a dart at it and say, let's be between basalt and snowmass and, but, you know, it's where your thinking is so that you are working with how the town's growing. To throw a cap at it is just going to mean this is a conversation that regurgitates in a way.
Respond to that real quickly, because I'm just wondering, my problem is that I don't have an actual number.
No, I
This is
know.
a guess of a number. So if I'm at a percentage, I think it would be fairly easy for somebody to challenge that and say, your number's wrong. So that's my only concern about that, Nina. It's like, I'm saying 150 more, but that's a guess.
Right,
Right.
right. I
Yeah.
mean, my whole world is very insular compared to other people who are doing this as a bigger business with more, or as a 3-month opportunity because they're gonna go stay with
Exactly.
family. I mean, I know people who have places and they're up in the Yukon all summer, and you know, it's what works for them to own, because this is where they want to be. Their heart and soul is here, but they have another heart and soul there. And my heart and soul doesn't go very far. So, and I land in your HCC issue, and so I don't have a concern. It's just as you're running numbers by. Maybe there is a way that there is a date by which you have something and you can calibrate it.
Okay, good thoughts. Thanks, Nina. Who else would like to share some thoughts with us, please?
Well, I'm just curious, what factors do you take into account to determine what are too many to STRs?
And can you tell us your name, please?
Rich Walker.
Hi, Rich. Thanks for being here.
No.
I mean, I think that's exactly what we're talking about right now. We didn't have a specific metric to say what was too many. And that's why we took a very restrictive approach. And we said, you know, there's not really a too many in the HCC in the downtown core, because you can get a regular bed and breakfast license there by right. You can get a lodging license there by right. And it's where a lot of our core businesses are that we want to support. So we said, we're not worried about the numbers there. And we said the same thing with primary residences, that if somebody wants to go out of town and rent their house out the ways we've just described, that we weren't concerned about. What we were concerned about was taking away long-term rentals. And so
Do you think that is happening with STRs?
well, it's not allowed to happen
No.
under our current regulations. Because you can only have a short-term rental if it's your primary residence or it's in the HCC. So we were concerned 2 years ago, 2.5, 3 years ago, when we started talking about this, that, you know, it was that post-COVID kind of travel boom that was happening everywhere. And it felt like prices were escalating across the board, right? Real estate prices, rent prices, short-term rental prices, everything was kind of going crazy. And it felt like we had to get a handle on it before the town became, you know, you go to Moab or Crested Butte or some of these places, and some neighborhoods have been sort of hollowed out by visitors. And, you know, even when you're the visitor, you look around and you're like, man, there's no locals here. What happened to this place? And we didn't want to become that town. So we were very restrictive, and now we're determining that maybe we can be a little less restrictive and still maintain, still achieve those goals.
Thanks.
Great answer.
But I mean, that's just, yeah, that's the history as I remember it. Hello.
James McGuire. I have one STR here in Carbondale. I am kind of hanging on by a string with my license because I got grandfathered in. It's not my primary residence. I just live in like a 350 square foot ADU. But I use that for supplemental income and will eventually move into it. But I would just like to say and support that anybody who does have an existing license, that we give them the option to renew and not do what was, I think, considered of like not renewing somebody and letting somebody else in from a lottery or something. And I think in the last work session, it seemed like there was a majority of the trustees that were in favor of removing the primary residence restriction. So is that still a consideration to maybe just remove that to see that would allow the extra 50 to come in?
I mean, what we're talking about really is allowing that to continue, that anybody who's the primary residence, they want to rent out a room or they want to rent out the whole house and they leave, not limiting that in any way, essentially, but adding a category of non-primary resident licenses that doesn't exist right now outside the downtown core.
Just open-ended, so anybody can get a license for that phase?
That's what we're talking about, is how many of those to issue,
Yeah.
if any. Right now, there's 0.
It sounds like 3% compared to the other municipalities is a lower percentage, and so I might agree with what was presented back there to do a percentage, maybe like 4% or 5%. So as the supply of housing increases in Carbondale, so does the amount of licenses. We are contributing, I think, significantly to the amount of business that we drive to local business owners here, to sales tax revenue for the town. As you said, the extra STR tax is now going to affordable housing. So I think we are having a benefit. I mean, it's been portrayed as a negative, especially a couple of years ago when this all first started and that other group came in and, you know, kind of give a scare tactic that there's all these outside investors coming into our town and they're going to take up all the housing supply and our locals are not going to have a place to live. It seems like that got debunked and we only have 35 licenses. You know?
Well, we limited that, right? We kind of
Nipped that in the bud.
nipped that. I mean, whether or not that would have happened, we got ahead of it. And there's anecdotal, if not statistical evidence in a lot of places where those exact things did happen. And I think,
yeah. I'm also a realtor and I own a property management company. So I have really good sense for the rental market right now. And it's slowing down a lot in terms of demand. There's a lot more supply on the market right now. It's hard to find tenants right now. We're having to drop rents to get tenants in. So I don't think we're in the same environment that we were a couple of years ago when this came up, and there's not the need for housing is, you know, it's still an issue, but it's not I don't think it's as much of a crisis as it was a couple of years ago, especially with all the new townhomes coming in and the condos and whatnot. Willits here, Glenwood over by Lowe's, and so.
Okay, thanks.
You're welcome.
All right, let's keep talking. Brittany, you want to share any thoughts?
Hi, Brittany Haley. I own 2 rentals in the HCC district. It's the same lot, just operate 2 of them on there. And I really liked what Lauren put forward. I think it makes a lot of sense. And I think 3.5% is a great number to go off of. I also know just in terms of like, since I own a management company and we work a lot in Aspen, there is a waiting list. So, you know, there's your short-term rental classic, there's your lodging, you know, all the different districts, and they cap it per each zone for each license. And it works. It's like, well, if the property sells and you buy it and it's in the STR Classic, you go into the pool and it basically eliminates any kind of investment person because then it'll just sit there. So I think that's a great idea, some kind of waiting list. And yeah, I think growing with the town at 3.5% based on the households is a great idea. This is what I've been really wanting to see for the last 2 years. And you know, with the Painted Pig closing and Cade coming in during our last meeting, I thought that was really strong. You know, and now Alegria is selling, and it's like these businesses, I keep hearing from every single one of them, like we can't get anyone in for dinner because our town can't support it. So I think that this would help up the vibrancy of the town, and we just need a moderate approach to getting tourists in to support our businesses, and then getting like long-term housing to support working for those businesses. And I really do think it's a moderate approach, and we went way too far the last time. And I think this is a great opportunity with Lauren's suggestion that I really like to find a middle ground. So yay, thanks, Lauren. That's all I have to say is just yay.
Well, let's discuss then. I mean, maybe just a first kind of threshold question. Does anybody have concerns or is not supportive of adding a category of licenses that doesn't exist right now, which is it's not your primary residence and it's outside the HCC? Like, before we start debating what percentage or number and exactly how it's calculated, are people generally in support of that? That's the direction that we've been heading. I support that. We generally.
I have some questions about that. Just, I would want to make, I mean, basically what you're doing is giving the potential for a street on someone's block to become a de facto bed and breakfast. And with all of that entails, and it can work, certainly, and it can be a great way to travel and experience a place. It can also become a party house, and I think we do then have to address all of the issues that so many of these other places have addressed with, you know, absentee person of responsibility being able to be contacted. I think with appropriate precautions, a reasonable number of those make sense. It's sort of, it's a way that people like to travel, and a whole house does provide some wonderful experiences. And I'm sure there are neighbors who would actually appreciate that sometimes, but I think there just have to be real clear precautions about what occurs.
So
we kind of have them.
Yeah, I mean, and I should clarify, I said we don't have this category. We don't have any new ones of this category, but we have, it sounds like about 20 right now.
I was gonna ask that question. How many?
Non-primary residents. And we have, and fortunately we have 2 years of experience, right, with dealing with complaints and all that. Jessica, could you comment on like what kind of rules we have in place to deal with those impacts and how many complaints and how we address those?
Yeah, we have a limited number of guests per bedroom.
Mhm.
So it's 2 guests per bedroom plus 2 guests in the living area. So a sofa couch. So essentially a 1-bedroom could fit a maximum of 4 people.
Gotcha. Okay.
So I think we did that to eliminate that party house type of atmosphere. We also require, like you said, a local contact person who is responsible for responding within an hour to any complaints.
Okay.
I have received complaints, not noise complaints, mostly parking complaints and complaints of non-licensed STRs.
Okay.
So that's been the extent of our complaints. I mean, we have so few compared to how many housing units we have that I don't foresee a lot of complaints. And I haven't turned down any applications of people trying to get licenses that were not homeowners. The way our software works now is that I generally have to have a conversation with someone before they even apply. So I have been asking a lot of questions before they even are allowed to apply. So
Somebody texted me, I'm not sure who, but about, I guess, if somebody wants to comment on Zoom. Unknown number to my phone. Oh, John, all right. Hi, John, you're unmuted now.
Wow, Ben, you just revealed you didn't save my number in your phone. I'm so hurt.
I'll comment by way of full disclosure that when we were unable to move 30 tenants into our new staff housing for the school district, we rented John and Patrick's Airbnb for teachers. Thank you, John. And it was the only one available. True story.
Sorry to see it.
I just really want to say thank you to the town staff. When this conversation started 2 years ago, there was a lot of fear mongering coming in and a lot of blame being thrown around. And also, the folks that were involved in this industry really felt like they were coming to a town that was really unprepared and didn't know much about what was going on. And it's night and day today. Lauren's presentation that she just made was fantastic. I mean, she really covered in just a few minutes a ton of information there, and you can tell how much work the town has put into this. And I just think we're in such a better place than we were. So I really appreciate everybody that worked on that and really helped change the tone of this conversation. Similar to what Ben just said about how Patrick and I stepped up to help the town when they asked us to. That's not a one-off story. In the 2 years that Patrick and I, in the few years that Patrick and I have been renting to short-term renters, we've hosted families whose houses have burnt down. We've hosted families who are in town because their loved ones were going through cancer treatment. We've hosted families who were in town for the summer so that their children could attend an Ascend-to-Go camp for the summer. Yes, a lot of people come to town and shop and come for vacation because Carbondale is a beautiful place, but short-term rentals are so much more valuable to the town than just that. And I hope people will take that into consideration when they make this choice. Thank you so much.
Thanks, John.
I just have a question. Have we considered not capping principal residences?
I would support not capping principal. I think the only cap we should have is on non-primary residences that aren't in the HCC. I don't think it makes sense in the HCC to have a cap because it's a zoning district and a tourism district and a B&B by right district. And I don't think we should have a cap on primary residences. Like
I
if
think you should
100
be able
extra
to,
people wanted to leave from out there and rent their houses out.
for 1 week of the year, I feel like anyone that owns a house should be able to.
And I don't think they should float necessarily with each other then. I think they should just be
I
separate because
agree.
it's complicated to, if suddenly the primary gets big and then we got 100.
That's what I was just.
I was
gonna
thinking that
suggest,
answers
is
that
maybe
question.
we don't have a total cap. Maybe we say unlimited principal residences, unlimited HCC, and a cap of 50 non-primary residences. And so if it ends up being 80, that's fine. And if it ends up being 115, that's
total,
fine.
yeah.
Total.
Yeah.
But because that does make more sense.
And a lot of those primary residences aren't available all the time. So that
Right.
license doesn't mean 365 nights a year. And
It's
same for.
means 181 minus, or it means
Yeah.
exactly. less
Well,
than
or it's
180,
that
right?
they're just a bedroom. There's people who
Oh,
rent
right,
a
right, right,
bedroom
right.
out when their
Yeah.
kids aren't
It
around.
can be
them.
ADUs though, too.
Yeah,
ADUs,
it can be
yeah.
ADUs.
A question based on the comment. People who non-primary residents already have one.
Yeah.
Do they get priority to keep it?
I would sure think so. I would think that it's,
So too.
Great.
if there's about 20 of those out there right now, and some of those are in the HCC, we're talking about a fairly small number, that'd be included in.
And it
whatever
doesn't,
number.
I think it would still not transfer if you sold the property, because then if an investor comes in and buys it, they have to reapply.
Back of the line.
Yeah, and they have to go to the back of the line. That solves that problem too.
I was just gonna say, for James's sake, I'm sure he's got lots of returns and he has an established business. And to give priority is kind of essential because you are telling people, I'll see you next year. And you need to be able to do that. I mean, I know for myself, I'm booked into 26. So there are people who say, I can't come next summer, but I want to come the following summer. So I think that we need to have some kind of priority system for established.
Yeah, I think.
For me, it's a business. It's not just I'm gone for a week.
I think
And for him, it's a business.
Just like when we started, we didn't want anybody to lose the business that they had at that time. And that's why we grandfathered everybody in. So I think we're essentially doing that again.
Yeah.
And then building on that.
And that's a good point, and we will definitely write that.
So let's say there's 20 that are already in the system, then that means that we have 30 spots that are open.
Yeah.
And those 20 stay in the system as long as the house doesn't sell or whatever. They're in. And then you open the remaining spots for licenses.
I mean, let's talk numbers then. It sounds like we're pretty aligned here on, we want to open the door to this. We want it to be a reasonable number. We don't want to limit primary residence licenses or HCC licenses. 50 is a nice round number. Lauren and I were on the census site today and she cited the number of households. There's another statistic that's total housing units, which is a little lower because I guess some families are doubled up. But the current number of housing units in town, this was in 2020, so it's a little bit higher, was 2,583. And if you do that times 2%, that's 51. Like it's a pretty close correlation. We could say it's, 2%, not to exceed 2%. That'd be, we could get an update from our planner every 2 years or something like that, where he could, I think our planner could extrapolate from the census data, get us a little bit better number, but might be 55 by the end of this if we went with 2%. But I'm comfortable somewhere around there. I'm not dead set on that, but that seems about like
I
what's
also
reasonable.
think that it's okay to have an ongoing conversation like every 2 years about this because things change. Like in 2 years ago when we were coming out of the COVID craziness, it seemed like there was a lot more tourists in town. And now it doesn't seem as much like that. And so I think maybe not having a percentage and just having a number and having this conversation every 2 or every 4 years makes sense to me because I think this is it. I mean, who knows? We could end up in a recession where all the apartments are empty. And then what? Then we want people coming to town. And so then we have a new conversation. I hope that doesn't happen.
Like, what did you just imagine?
Wow.
I just really feel for Lauren's side of the equation of just like, let's not make this too complicated on
Right.
staff.
Keep it simple. And that's why I'm glad that we stated, when we first looked at this, we looked at every single way it was done. And Erica did all kinds of research. We didn't have the CAS spreadsheet at that point. And, there's some really complicated systems where you have to draw a radius around the house. And like Brittany described, it's by zone district. And I like where we are, that it's simple. It's a number, either a percentage or a hard number. I can live with either one. And that we have some ongoing, maybe the ordinance doesn't even set the number. Maybe the ordinance says a number to be, set every 2 years. I don't know. We could get legal advice on that. Maybe the ordinance just has to be updated when it's updated. Are people comfortable with, are we about there for tonight? Like, anybody feel like we're, yeah, way out of line? So we're thinking, are we thinking 50 or are we thinking a percentage?
I think a nice even number makes sense and just keep it simple. I think for now, and I think to the folks who sort of addressed sort of attitude and the efforts of folks to kind of squelch this a little bit, and maybe that was overeager a little bit, but I think what we've shown is that we're open, that if it had been too much, we'd be in a more difficult space here. And what we did is we kind of got out in front of it a little bit. At least one way of looking at it is, and now we are rightly looking at it and understanding what may or may not have happened. I don't think we put an economic damper on the town unnecessarily, but now we're realizing that we can, push the gas pedal a little bit there and have a bit of our cake and eat it too, I think, at the same time. So I'm really comfortable and think it's wise politics and wise custodianship of our housing stock.
Brittany, join us again. And just use the mic so John and anybody else can hear you.
Yeah. 2 questions real quick. Would ADUs then be considered primary residence?
Jessica, can you tell us how that's interpreted right now?
Right now, it is interpreted as if the ADU is on the lot that is considered your primary residence, then it would be considered primary.
Got it.
That was just our easy way of the property is your primary property.
Got it.
Yeah.
That's what I thought. And then if I may make a suggestion, only one license per property.
The issue that we've come across with that is our compliance software is looking in your advertising for the license number. And if there's two listings, and so that's why that property specifically that we've talked about has
That's
two
HCC
separate.
though.
It is HCC.
So that's unlimited, but I was saying,
It's still looking for that, and it will show up as non-compliant if the license number is duplicated with a different address.
I guess, yeah, that's what I'm wondering is if then you have a property that has a main home and an ADU, it's a second home and that person scoops up 2 licenses.
I think they would, yeah, if they're gonna
Yeah.
list them separately.
If they're gonna list them
If it's in
separately.
HCC, like that doesn't matter.
Right.
But if it's in, you know, I guess,
Well, that's an interesting point.
Yeah.
I see where you're going with
I
that.
just could see issues
Mhm.
with
If they
that,
own- If they're
yeah.
capping it at 50 and one owner has.
One owner has 2
two
licenses, an
licenses.
ADU and that's when you're getting into the
Right,
like,
how does the board
does it
feel about
affect,
that? If it's, we're not talking about HCC, we're not talking about principal residence, we're talking about of the 50 that are capped. Do we allow an owner to have more than 2 licenses?
Well,
Or
more
than
I
one.
mean, more than 1 license.
So what I'm hearing is that it's the software that's sort of driving it right now is that you need 2 licenses for two
separate
listings.
Listings.
Is it because of staff time to determine whether that
Yes.
property owner is actually non-compliant?
It shows up as non-compliant, and so it would take staff
It's an
time.
automated system.
It's an
So it would
automated
take-
system.
It's a staff time concern to
Yes.
figure out if that really is non-compliant.
Yes.
But
Okay.
2 licenses means 2 short-term rentals. So if we're capping short-term rentals
Right.
at 50, right, that's different than if there was two rentals on 1 license, then we really would be sort of gaming the system. Right?
Yeah, I guess I
And
just
if we
see it as
wanna
such a
limit it to
small-
2, if we're saying, well, we can have 50 more, right?
Yeah, I would say 50 licenses for the second, like, non-primary, but only 1 license allowed per property.
And so one of those then would have to be a long-term rental
Primary residence.
or your primary residence.
Yeah. Well, primary residence was
It,
unlimited.
its
Yeah.
own, then it would be a
Right.
So
different
it would
license.
have, yeah.
I'm talking about a second home that has 2 units. What if somebody tried to then rent the main home and get a license for the main home and then the ADU short-term rent that as well?
I think they'd have to get 2 licenses and I'm
Yeah.
okay
But I don't
with
think that should be
The question
allowed.
is, should we let them?
Yeah, should we let?
I don't know why not. What's the problem?
I'd want to go to 3. I think I could do 2 maybe, but.
I mean, I think also we're assuming that there's gonna be like a rush on these. I don't know if that's true. I mean,
It's not transferable, right? So
Right.
it's.
I mean, what's your sense? You're in the industry. Like, how many people are out there that, is it more than 30 that are gonna jump on the opportunity to do this? Where it's not their primary residence, it's not in the HCC, it's not in River Valley Ranch, mind you,
I know.
right? That took out a lot of potential.
In other areas that I've noticed, it's, you can only have 1 license per property because that's where you're starting to take away long-term rentals. That's where you're getting into that whole conundrum.
So if someone has a second home and it has 2 properties on it, the hope is that they're short-term rentaling one and they're short-term renting, or they're long-term renting the other.
I think that's kind of,
Yeah.
So that they're not double dipping into
yeah.
our limited supply. Which sort of makes sense to me because if you think about the houses that are like on, let's just say like over in Hendricks Ranch, there are some houses that have an ADU above their garage and a main house. And the hope is that if they're gonna short-term rent their property, that they're not gonna do both.
And
they've
also
got a
it gets
long-term-
very like transient when it's, I mean, my house in the HCC has a back house that's short-term rented. And then I just moved out of the front house and that's now short-term rented. That's a lot to keep. And in a residential zone, it's a lot. Like it works in a commercial zone.
Right, that's, I just wanna be
But
clear,
that's
you're
what
asking
she's-
us to
but
ban
she's-
what you're doing
No, I'm in
outside.
HCC.
But
I'm
down
in
the street, if you
HCC.
cross the street, it's
Yeah, across the
illegal,
street.
but it works for you.
I mean, my neighbor is the pot shop. I don't have any non-commercial neighbors.
Yeah.
And when
It
you're
is a
in a
difference.
Hendricks Ranch and you have that, I think it's very different. I think that's very different.
Okay, I guess I'm not too worried about this either way. So if people
Yeah.
want to be more restrictive there, as Brittany's suggesting.
I think it's one license per property in the non-HCC and non-primary.
Okay, thank you for the suggestion.
Nice suggestion.
Thank you.
May I add one thing for us to just think about, and
Yeah.
maybe it's something that comes up again, I think it flies in the face of a lot of what's on that matrix. But I don't think we should necessarily discount the ability of, or the propriety of affordable housing or resident occupied units to be able to short-term rent on some levels. Because, and maybe one way you do that is you earmark it towards capital improvements or something. And maybe that starts to get more complicated. But my experience has been with folks in Aspen who are in these affordable housing units for whom, or for which the complex is falling apart and needs a roof and needed a roof 10 years ago, but there's no money whatsoever to do that. And so many of them would happily travel a couple of weeks a year and would happily take that, make good use of those funds. And I feel like that shouldn't be something that we should discount entirely, and actually could be something that would be very, very useful as part of maintaining that stock.
So you're saying remove the prohibition we currently have on deed restricted affordable housing being
With
short-term rental.
perhaps, and this is something that I think you could do with a certain number of days. Maybe it's not 180 days a year, but that software does allow us to know how many time, or some software allows us to know how many days things are rented. Yes?
No.
It doesn't?
It tells
Okay.
us how many days approximately the rental is off the market. So it
Okay.
checks the availability calendar and tells us how many days it's not on the market, assuming that those days are rented, which is
Right.
not the case for primary homeowners.
Okay.
Well, and a lot of it depends on the deed restriction too.
Yeah.
I mean, we can have a policy that says deed restricted property, can't be short-term rented, but some of those deed restrictions restrict them
Already
by their
restrict that.
nature in the land records.
I just think it's something,
It's a more-
that
that's a more
we ought not to
complicated-
discount that as a matter of course, because I think there's a solution to some issues there that sometimes pop up, and I don't think that extra income necessarily should be verboten.
Well, sort of like the heat pumps, this might be a situation where the technology has not quite gotten there, but hopefully it will at some point where we could hopefully have a little bit more of a tailored approach, I would hope. And I already floated that at the July meeting, I think, about, could you do a 30-day license or
Yeah.
something that's a cheaper thing that doesn't have building inspection stuff, that's for people to just, sign up, go on the internet, sign up for it. It's like, whatever, it's,
It's good for 30 days.
yeah, but you can't do that if you don't have all of the software side of it. So
You also can't do that after people died in a short-term rental of Valley without, we need the safety piece of that.
even for,
Whole
well,
family died.
then that person who's living in that house long-term is at the exact same risk, aren't they
There's
not?
nobody living in the house long-term.
In that house,
Well, no,
yeah.
he's saying like if.
But I'm saying
you're
if it's
primary
if it's a
resident.
primary residence,
Yeah.
Yes,
then
but that's a
you're
risk
taking that
they
risk
take
on.
on themselves if they're not abiding by the code because they don't have a carbon monoxide detector.
Well, I think for now.
That's a little more complicated.
My
than we
apologies.
can go tonight.
Does anybody else want to consider at this stage? And again, we review this every summer is sort of our cadence. We review it and then we decide if we want to make any changes. So I would recommend that for now, we stick with a pretty significant change and then we maybe table some of those others. But if anybody else wants to go into these other topics at this point, we can.
I think we're fine for now, but I think we should keep our eye on these other things.
Yeah.
I would agree.
Okay.
I still like keeping it simple. And I hear what I hear what people are saying, but like you were saying, Ben, I don't know if that's really gonna make a big difference.
With the two on one property.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, so do we want to recommend that staff come back with an ordinance that allows for 50, up to 50 short-term rentals that are not in the HCC and that are not people's primary residence? And that we continue to review that every year?
Yes.
And staff will, I think, come back to us, reach out to some other municipalities who have a cap and figure out how do we manage that? Is it a lottery? Is it a waiting list? You know, what does that look like when the 51st applicant calls? I don't think we have to discuss that right now. I think we can take a recommendation.
I'd also like to know when that ordinance comes in front of us, how many people will be grandfathered in?
Right, we should
that
know how many that
extra-
is, but,
Because I'd like to know that before we firm up
okay.
whatever we're deciding.
Grandfathered in?
Like how many short-term licenses are in effect right now for people who are not principal residents and people who are not in HCC?
People who are already grandfathered.
Yes,
Who have
yes, so that
licenses.
the ones that will be grandfathered in once we open it up.
I got you.
Okay.
They'll be taking up whatever number of those.
Right, they'll be
50.
taking up
If
a
there's
number, but
20.
they are already grandfathered.
Yes,
They already
yes,
have
yes, if
licenses.
there's
Yeah,
20.
no problem.
Yeah, it seems like it's 10-ish, I'm guessing, because it sounds like there's 40 total licenses right now. It sounds like about half of those are primary residents. That leaves 20, and it sounds like quite a few of those are downtown. So it's
Yeah.
somewhere, but if
There's
you can
not
get
very
us that
many.
number,
There's not.
it's good to know. Okay, any further discussion on this one?
Thank you, Lauren.
All right.
Good work.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you. Just before everybody leaves, I just
And
put
thank you all
the
for-
budget
thank you all for
calendar in
coming.
front of you so you could see what's coming up
Next,
next
yeah,
for the budget.
thank you.
Okay, no problem.
Week, not a ton on the agenda right now. We have department budget presentations from police and recreation. I doubt we'll have this ordinance in front of us. We had that as a maybe, that quickly. And then, that's weird. It says clear work plan and budget, but we did that tonight.
GCE.
I think GCE.
GC.
Oh, it's GCE. Okay. So yeah,